What would you do if you lost everything? What if, one day, everything you've built, every success you fought for, every dream you've chased, was taken away in an instant? How would you respond? The court was filled with a tense, electric silence. The kind that makes the air feel thick, almost like it's holding its breath, waiting for something monumental to unfold. All eyes were on Elon Musk as he sat in the defendant's chair, his hands gripping the edge of the wooden desk in front of him. This wasn't just any court case. This wasn't about a small mistake, a minor issue that could be brushed aside. No, this was bigger. Much bigger. At the front of the courtroom, the judge had just delivered the verdict. The words rang out, echoing through the space, each syllable like a hammer striking an anvil. Mr. Musk, the court hereby fines you $489 million for the financial mismanagement in your companies. This is a direct consequence of the reckless decisions that have led to a loss of trust and failure to meet obligations. The fine is non-negotiable. The words hung in the air, leaving Musk speechless. His usual confidence, the bravado that had taken him to the peaks of success, seemed to vanish in an instant. His face was a mixture of shock and disbelief, the kind of expression you'd expect from someone who'd just been struck by something far greater than they ever anticipated. The room was still. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. Outside, the world continued, oblivious to the storm raging in that small courtroom. But for Musk, it was as if the ground beneath him had just crumbled. $489 million. Almost $500 million. The weight of it was staggering. He had always prided himself on overcoming obstacles, on defying expectations. But this? This felt different. It wasn't just money, it was everything he had worked for. It was the culmination of years of blood, sweat, and tears poured into Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures. Every sleepless night, every relentless pursuit of perfection, every moment of doubt he had silenced in his head, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of such a devastating blow. He stared straight ahead, unable to move. The lawyer who had been standing next to him had already begun to speak, whispering words of reassurance and advice. But Musk barely heard them. The room felt too loud, and yet, he couldn't hear anything. The judge, an older man with an air of authority, was making his way out of the room. He turned his head, briefly locking eyes with Musk, who was still in a daze. "Mr. Musk," the judge said sternly. "This is the reality you face. You've made choices, and now you will pay the price." A wave of panic surged through Musk's chest. The fine was just the beginning. The media would have a field day with this. The public would turn their backs. The trust he had painstakingly built with his investors and supporters, it was all on the line now. Could he recover from this? Could he ever rebuild the empire he had spent so long constructing? The answer, he knew, wasn't clear. But one thing was certain, he couldn't let this be the end. No matter how severe the consequences, no matter how much it hurt, he had to fight back. He stood up from his seat, his legs feeling like lead. He was numb, but there was a fire beginning to stir deep inside him. His mind raced, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't a plan to reach Mars or revolutionize transportation that consumed his thoughts. No, now he had a far more pressing question on his mind: how could he fight this? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He thought to himself, channeling the voice of his YouTube channel, as if asking for advice from the world. But there were no easy answers. Musk knew the fight ahead would be unlike anything he had ever faced before. The days following the trial were a whirlwind of media frenzy, with headlines blaring the shocking fine and speculating on Musk's future. His phone rang non-stop, texts and emails flooding his inbox from business partners, investors, and even old friends. Some were supportive, offering words of encouragement, but others, they were less understanding. "What happened, Elon? You're better than this," one message read. "How could you let it get this far?" another one asked, the frustration clear in the words. The weight of those messages added another layer to the crushing pressure he was already under. Yet, despite the voices of doubt that filled his life, there was something else rising in Musk, a determination to prove everyone wrong. It wasn't just about saving his reputation. It was about saving his vision. About not letting this moment define him, but instead, using it to fuel a comeback that no one saw coming. The court decision had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited something deep within him. Musk had faced setbacks before, disasters, failures, moments when everything seemed lost. But this felt different. He had never been this close to losing it all. And yet, here he was. Standing on the precipice, unsure of what the future held, but knowing one thing for sure, he couldn't back down. He couldn't let the story end here. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't just a tech mogul, he was a dreamer. A man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. But to understand the weight of the $489 million fine, to understand the depths of his despair in that courtroom, we first need to look back. To understand the journey that brought Musk to this moment, the relentless pursuit of innovation, the painful setbacks, and the personal sacrifices that accompanied them. Elon was born in Pretoria, South Africa, a place that seemed worlds away from the Silicon Valley empire he would one day build. He wasn't born into privilege, and his early life wasn't defined by wealth or fame. Instead, it was a tale of a curious, determined young boy with an innate love for technology and a mind that never stopped questioning. His father, Elon Musk, was an engineer, and his mother, May Musk, was a model and dietitian, both of whom shaped his work ethic and intellectual drive. But life wasn't always easy for Elon. He was bullied as a child. His quiet nature and intense focus on his studies made him an outcast in school. He found solace in books, often retreating into the pages of science fiction novels and biographies of inventors. He would later admit that these early years of isolation were formative, pushing him to develop resilience and determination that would define his adult life. When he was 17, Musk left South Africa for Canada to avoid compulsory military service and to pursue a better future. He enrolled at Queen's University, where he would stay for 2 years before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania. There, he earned degrees in both physics and economics, a combination that would later serve him well in his ventures. But even back then, he wasn't interested in following the traditional path. Elon's first major business endeavor came when he co-founded Zip2, a city guide software company, in 1995. He had the vision to take something as mundane as a city map and make it more dynamic, providing businesses with an online presence and helping users find their way around. The company grew quickly, and 4 years later, Compaq purchased it for $307 million. Musk walked away with $22 million, but instead of taking a break, he reinvested his earnings into something even bigger. His next venture was X.com, an online payment company. After a merger with Confinity, which was focused on a product called PayPal, Musk became CEO. Under his leadership, PayPal grew into the dominant online payment system, and in 2002, eBay bought it for $1.5 billion. Musk's share of the sale was $165 million. But again, instead of retreating into a life of luxury, he chose to reinvest all of that money into even more ambitious projects. It was in these early ventures that Musk began to forge the persona that the world would come to know, a man who refused to follow conventional rules. Whether it was sending a car into space, trying to colonize Mars, or attempting to revolutionize electric cars, Musk had one guiding principle: to push the boundaries of what was possible, no matter the cost. And that brings us to Tesla. Founded in 2003 by engineers Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, the company had the goal of making electric vehicles that could compete with traditional gasoline-powered cars. But it wasn't until Elon Musk joined the company as chairman in 2004, after investing in it, that Tesla began to grow into the juggernaut it is today. Musk didn't just see Tesla as a company, he saw it as part of a bigger mission. He wasn't just trying to build a car, he was trying to change the world. He believed that humanity's future depended on sustainable energy, and electric cars were just the beginning. Over the years, Musk pushed the company to innovate at an unbelievable pace, sometimes taking risks that many would consider reckless. For example, he famously invested nearly all of his personal wealth to keep Tesla afloat during its darkest days, when the company was just months away from bankruptcy. But despite all the challenges, Musk's determination paid off. Tesla became profitable, and the company's stock soared, making him one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. But it wasn't just his financial success that defined him. It was his ability to disrupt entire industries: electric cars, space travel, solar energy, and more. Yet, for all his achievements, Musk's story was far from perfect. He had always been a polarizing figure. His public persona, marked by Twitter rants, controversial statements, and an almost manic energy, often overshadowed his accomplishments. Many admired his vision, but others questioned his methods. Investors, employees, and even family members had often found themselves at odds with his unrelenting drive. And now, here he was, sitting in a courtroom, facing the consequences of his actions. The weight of that $489 million fine was far more than just the money. It represented everything Musk had worked for, everything he had sacrificed. But despite the pressure, there was one thing that Musk never let go of: his belief in the future. His belief that, no matter the odds, humanity had to reach for the stars. In the wake of the trial, Musk retreated into his personal space, away from the cameras and the constant media scrutiny. He had always been a man of action, but now, with the fine looming over him, he found himself at a crossroads. The weight of his empire, the massive public persona, the responsibilities to his companies, his investors, and most importantly, to his family, had never felt heavier. As the days passed, the world outside his bubble continued to buzz with speculation. Wall Street analysts dissected the potential long-term effects of the fine on Tesla and SpaceX. The media ran stories about Musk's future. Would he continue to lead his companies? Would this scandal tarnish his legacy? But in the quiet moments, when Musk allowed himself to reflect, one thing became clear: this was the hardest challenge he had ever faced. And yet, it also felt like the most defining moment of his life. Elon Musk was used to being misunderstood. He had been an outlier for most of his life, and perhaps this was just another moment in which the world would doubt him. But this time, something deep inside told him that it was different. The fine, the court ruling, the pressure, they were all just another test. And it was one he had no intention of failing. The fine had been set. The verdict was delivered. But for Elon Musk, the real battle had only just begun. The fine of $489 million was a shock, a blow that sent ripples through every corner of his empire. However, it wasn't the financial penalty that consumed his thoughts, it was the massive implications that it would have on everything he had worked for. Elon had faced hardships before: failures, criticism, doubts. But none of those had ever reached this scale. In a strange way, the fine felt like the culmination of a series of miscalculations, missteps, and misunderstood decisions that had been building for years. The tech world admired his genius, but behind every major breakthrough, every revolution he led, there was an undercurrent of tension, a constant battle against the system, against conventional wisdom, against the very forces that wanted to hold him back. And now, it felt like the world was finally catching up with him. After the court case, news outlets around the globe were ablaze with stories about the fine. Headlines screamed, "Musk fined $489 million for corporate mismanagement." Elon Musk's empire in peril after court ruling, and billionaires' legal woes mount. What's next for Tesla? The media frenzy felt suffocating. Musk could barely step outside without cameras flashing in his face. Investors, partners, and employees were all wondering the same thing: is this the end for Elon Musk? Musk knew that this was a critical juncture. Tesla was at the forefront of electric vehicle innovation, and SpaceX was pushing the boundaries of space exploration. But both companies, as grand as they were also on a precarious edge. One misstep, one wrong decision, and everything could come crashing down. It wasn't just the fine that Musk had to contend with. It was the mounting pressure from within his own company. There were those in Tesla's upper ranks who questioned whether Musk was still fit to lead. His focus had always been split between SpaceX and Tesla, and some feared that the legal battles would divert his attention further, weakening the vision that had once driven the companies forward. "Elon, you need to address this," one of his trusted advisors said during a tense meeting in Tesla's headquarters. The man, an executive who had been with Musk for years, looked at him with a mix of concern and determination. "People are starting to lose confidence. If you don't act, things could spiral out of control." Musk didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk in front of him. He had never been one to bow to pressure. But this? This was different. The fine was a reality, and the consequences of it were rapidly unfolding, touching everything from stock prices to employee morale. Tesla's board of directors was growing restless. They were loyal to Musk, but the fine had made them uneasy. The company's future was tied to Musk's vision, but there were fears that his legal entanglements would distract him from his role as CEO. "How long can we keep this up?" Elon, another board member, an older man with a sharp gaze, asked. "You've got SpaceX to deal with. The media's eating you alive. Tesla's stock is already dropping because of this. We need you focused. Can you do that?" Musk's gaze shifted out of the window, his mind spinning with the enormity of the situation. For a brief moment, he considered stepping back, handing over control, maybe even temporarily, so he could focus on resolving the legal issues. But that thought didn't sit well with him. He had never been one to step aside. Not when the stakes were this high. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Tesla will continue to move forward. We're not backing down, not even an inch." His words hung in the air, but inside, Musk was grappling with a different reality. The pressure was mounting. He could feel the weight of it pressing on him, tightening around him like a vice. The fine was just the beginning, a symbol of the fragility of everything he had built. And now, more than ever, he needed to make sure Tesla and SpaceX didn't fall apart under the pressure. But the external pressures weren't the only ones Musk had to face. Deep inside, he was dealing with a growing uncertainty. What if his vision wasn't enough? What if his relentless drive to push boundaries, to disrupt industries, had finally caught up with him? There was a constant, gnawing voice in the back of his mind, one that wondered whether his ambition had led him down a path where even his vast talents couldn't save him. He had always been the maverick, the outsider. But now, the world was watching, waiting for him to fail. And if he did, the consequences wouldn't just be personal. They would be global. At the same time, a series of internal conflicts within his personal life began to surface. Musk's relationships with those closest to him were starting to strain under the weight of his obsessive work habits. He had been married 3 times, and each relationship had ended in its own unique way. He had 5 children, 2 from his first wife, Justine Musk, and 3 from his second wife, Tallulah Riley. Despite his fame and fortune, Musk's personal life had never been simple. His relentless pursuit of success, his single-mindedness, often left little room for the kind of emotional connection that could have kept him grounded. His most recent marriage to Grimes, a Canadian musician and artist, had added even more complexity to his personal life. They shared a son, XAEA-12, whose unconventional name made headlines just as much as Musk's businesses did. But despite their child, the relationship was fraught with tension. Musk's focus on work left little time for a relationship that had already been strained by the intensity of his career. As the legal battles raged on, Musk found himself retreating into his work even more, distancing himself from the people he cared about most. His employees noticed the change in him. The spark that had always been a part of Musk's genius seemed dimmer now. His usual energy and enthusiasm for the next big idea felt absent, replaced by the heavy burden of everything that had gone wrong. Musk was caught in the crossfire of his own ambitions, battling the expectations of the world, his family, and his companies. And while he had always prided himself on being able to handle pressure, this felt like something he wasn't prepared for. He wasn't just facing external forces, he was fighting a battle within himself. The courtroom had cleared, but Elon Musk's mind was still racing. The fine had been handed down, and the world was watching closely. It wasn't just the weight of the financial penalty that hung over him, it was the potential unraveling of everything he had worked so hard to build. And yet, even in the face of this crushing pressure, he knew that the battle wasn't over. This was merely the beginning of a journey that would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. In the weeks following the verdict, Musk had retreated into a place where only the most important people were allowed access to him, his inner circle of advisors and closest colleagues. For the first time in years, Musk felt like an outsider in his own world. The world that had once applauded his innovations, the world that had hailed him as a visionary, was now questioning whether he could weather this storm. But Elon had never been one to shy away from conflict. His entire career had been defined by his willingness to take on monumental challenges, regardless of the odds. Whether it was creating the first commercially viable electric car or launching a rocket into space, Musk had always believed that the impossible was merely a starting point. And this time, he would need to tap into that same unrelenting drive if he was to navigate this new storm. SpaceX was Musk's first love. The company had always been more than just a business to him, it was the realization of a dream he'd had since childhood. As a boy, Musk had been captivated by the idea of space exploration, inspired by the likes of Star Trek and the great scientists of the past. He didn't just want to visit space, he wanted to colonize it, to ensure that humanity had a future beyond Earth. At the time of the fine, SpaceX was in a period of unprecedented success. They had successfully launched rockets, made strides toward reusable space travel, and even signed contracts with NASA. However, the legal challenges Musk faced with Tesla had created a ripple effect that reached SpaceX. Investors were getting nervous. Would Musk's legal troubles interfere with his ability to lead both companies? Would SpaceX's incredible momentum be slowed by the chaos in the other parts of his life? One of Musk's top lieutenants, Gwynne Shotwell, who had been with SpaceX from the beginning, called a meeting to discuss the implications. As the president and COO of the company, Gwynne had seen it all. She was one of the few who could push back against Musk's more daring ideas, while also knowing when to support him in the face of overwhelming odds. "Elon, we need to talk about how to move forward," she said as she sat across from him, the weight of the conversation palpable. "The fine, it's making people nervous. I know we've had our issues in the past, but this is different. People are looking to you for leadership, and we need to make sure that your attention is not divided." Musk looked at her, his jaw tightening as he processed her words. He knew she was right, this situation had the potential to tear him apart, both personally and professionally. But he wasn't one to shy away from a challenge, no matter how daunting. "I've faced worse," Musk replied quietly, though his tone didn't have the usual fire. There was an edge of uncertainty in his voice that even he wasn't used to hearing. "We'll power through this. SpaceX can't stop. Not now. Not when we're so close to reaching the stars." Shotwell nodded, her face unreadable. She'd seen this side of Elon before, the quiet determination, the refusal to back down in the face of adversity. But she also knew that the pressure of handling both Tesla's and SpaceX's futures simultaneously was bound to take a toll. "I believe in you, Elon," she said, her voice softening. "But we have to be strategic. Tesla is your priority right now. Let us handle SpaceX's daily operations while you get this under control. We can keep the momentum going without you having to micromanage every aspect." Musk stared out the window, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew she was right. He couldn't do everything himself. He had to delegate, to trust others. But the thought of stepping back, even temporarily, was like stepping into uncharted territory. For someone who had built his empire by controlling every detail, the idea of loosening his grip felt alien. The legal battles were only getting started. Musk's team of lawyers had begun to comb through every detail of the fine, looking for potential loopholes or ways to reduce the penalty. They filed an appeal, challenging the ruling on several fronts. But even as the legal process unfolded, the damage was already done. Investors, once so eager to place their bets on Musk's ventures, were starting to lose confidence. The stock price of Tesla had already taken a hit, and SpaceX wasn't immune to the fallout either. As the media frenzy continued, Musk found himself at the center of a whirlwind that he couldn't escape. It was one thing to be a visionary, it was another thing entirely to navigate the storm that came with being one. Meanwhile, inside Tesla's headquarters, the pressure was mounting. The company's engineers were still working tirelessly to improve their electric vehicles, pushing toward the next big breakthrough. But the uncertainty of the company's leadership had begun to take its toll. Employees, many of whom had once believed in Musk's unwavering vision, were now questioning whether he could truly deliver the future he had promised. The internal conflict within Tesla mirrored the external conflict Musk was facing. Would he be able to hold it all together? Would he be able to convince the world that his vision for a sustainable, electrified future was still worth fighting for? These were the questions that Musk would have to answer in the days to come. The truth was, Musk was starting to see things differently. The fine, the media, the legal battles, these were all just distractions. They didn't change the fundamental truth: the world needed to move toward sustainable energy, and he was the one person who could make it happen. SpaceX and Tesla were not just businesses, they were the embodiments of his dreams for a better future. They were the legacy he wanted to leave behind. But to create that legacy, Musk realized that he needed to change. Not just his approach to leadership, but how he interacted with the people around him. His obsessive drive had often alienated those closest to him. It had strained his relationships, and now, it was putting his companies at risk. If he wanted to continue pushing the boundaries of what was possible, he would need to evolve, to become not just a leader of innovation, but a leader who understood the importance of balance, of people. Musk was no stranger to pressure. The stories of his relentless work ethic, his ability to turn impossible ideas into reality, were well known. But as he sat in his office that afternoon, he felt the weight of it all more than ever before. The financial fine had been just the start, a public spectacle that threatened to undo the years of hard work he had poured into his companies. What had been an external storm was now beginning to seep into his very soul. The months following the fine had been a blur of legal battles, media storms, and an ever-growing sense of isolation. His advisors urged him to remain focused, but the toll it was taking on his personal life was undeniable. His relationships with his children, his ex-wives, and even his closest friends seemed to be fraying at the edges. It was one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a soft, golden hue over his office, that Musk finally cracked. Sitting alone, he allowed himself to feel the exhaustion, the frustration, and the deep sense of loss that had been building up inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about rockets, electric cars, or his next big idea. He wasn't thinking about the future at all. He was just present. The phone rang, snapping him out of his trance. He glanced at the screen and saw it was from his ex-wife, Tallulah Riley. He hesitated before answering. His personal life had always been complicated, especially when it came to Tallulah. They had married twice and divorced twice, a cycle that, despite their mutual affection, had been strained by Musk's obsession with work. "Elon, we need to talk," Tallulah's voice came through, calm but urgent. "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately." He sighed. He wasn't in the mood for another difficult conversation. But at the same time, he knew that if he didn't talk to her now, things would only fester. Musk had always been a man of action, often too much action. It was time to confront the things he'd been avoiding. "I'm listening," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's not just about the companies or the fine. It's about you," she said, her voice softer now. "Elon, you've been carrying this weight for so long. You're not okay. I can hear it in your voice, in the way you've been acting. And I get it. I do. But you have to realize that you can't do this alone. You're driving yourself into the ground. Musk didn't respond immediately. His mind swirled with all the complexities of his life, his businesses, the fine, the media circus, and the constant pressure he had placed on himself. His ego had always been his strength, but now, it felt like a burden. I've made sacrifices, Tallulah. For SpaceX, for Tesla. I can't afford to slow down now, he replied, the tension in his voice palpable. And what about your happiness, Elon? She asked gently. What about the people who love you? Do you really think they can't tell you're hurting? You've always been so focused on changing the world, but what about changing yourself? What about your emotional well-being? Her words hit him like a hammer. Musk, the man who had changed the world with his companies, had neglected the very thing that had been the foundation of his success, his own emotional health. He had always seen himself as invincible, someone who could shoulder it all. But now, in this moment of vulnerability, he saw the cracks in his armor. Maybe you're right, he murmured, his voice low and filled with an unfamiliar softness. Maybe I've been so obsessed with pushing forward that I've forgotten to take care of what's right in front of me. Tallulah was silent for a moment. Elon, it's not too late to change. But you need to start with yourself. You can't fix everything else until you fix this. And that means you need to be honest with yourself about what's really important. Her words echoed in his mind long after the conversation ended. He wasn't sure what had changed in that moment, but something shifted inside of him. He had spent so long chasing the next big thing, relentlessly pursuing his vision for a future that was always just out of reach. But now, the thing that seemed most out of reach was peace, the kind of inner peace that allowed him to appreciate the present, to live without the constant strain of perfection. The next few days were a blur of reflection and deep thought. Musk spent hours walking through the empty halls of Tesla and SpaceX, thinking about what Tallulah had said. He knew that something had to give. He couldn't keep running at full speed without acknowledging the emotional toll it was taking on him. He began to have more candid conversations with his close circle of advisors and friends. Gwynne Shotwell, always pragmatic, suggested that Musk take a more hands-off approach for a while, allowing his teams to operate more independently. You've built something incredible here, Elon, she said, but you need to trust the people around you to carry that vision forward. You don't have to do it all. He didn't like the idea at first. Giving up control had never been in his nature. But as the days passed, he realized that to continue leading his companies, he needed to lead differently. He needed to step back and allow others to step up. That decision marked the beginning of a transformation, not just for his companies, but for Musk himself. Musk's breakthrough came one evening, late at night. He sat alone in his office, the lights dimmed, the quiet hum of the building surrounding him. He looked at his phone, scrolling through messages from employees, investors, and colleagues. There were the usual updates, the business proposals, the mundane tasks that filled his day. But then, something caught his eye, a simple message from one of his engineers at SpaceX. It was short and to the point, "We're ready for the Mars mission launch. Just waiting for your approval." For the first time in months, Musk felt something other than the usual anxiety. He felt excitement. This was it. This was the future he had worked for. This was why he had endured all of the struggles, all of the pain. SpaceX had come so far, and now they were on the brink of something incredible. His finger hovered over the screen as he prepared to send the message of approval. But before he hit send, he stopped. Musk took a deep breath, and instead of sending a simple "go," he added something else. He typed, "This is our moment. Make it count." It wasn't just about the mission, it was about everything. It was about trusting his team, trusting the process, and finally letting go of the fear that had been holding him back. That night, Elon Musk went to bed knowing that the next phase of his journey had begun. It was no longer just about the companies, the stock prices, or the fines. It was about finding a balance between pushing the boundaries of what was possible and taking care of himself, of those he cared about. And in that quiet, reflective moment, he realized something: the greatest journey he had ever undertaken wasn't just to Mars or to the future of humanity, it was the journey of learning how to live fully, without the constant pressure of perfection. Elon Musk woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in months. The weight of the legal battle, the financial penalty, and the ever-growing media attention were still there, but now they seemed more manageable, almost secondary. His mind was no longer consumed by the incessant demands of the world. Instead, it was focused on what mattered most: the mission, the vision, and the people who had helped him get there. He looked out his window at the vast expanse of land where SpaceX had grown from a small startup to a global force in the space industry. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the launch pads. For a moment, Musk allowed himself to simply be present, to take in the enormity of what had been accomplished. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like it was full of potential, not peril. The breakthrough had come not from a new technological innovation, but from a shift in his mindset. He realized that to continue pushing the boundaries of possibility, he needed to focus on the people around him, his team, his family, his friends, just as much as he focused on his own ambitions. Musk had always been the driver, the one who set the pace and led the charge. But now, he understood the importance of allowing others to take the wheel, to lead in their own way, while he provided the direction. That morning, Musk called an emergency meeting with his leadership teams at both SpaceX and Tesla. He knew it was time for a change in how they operated, and he wanted to be the one to guide them through it. He couldn't do it all alone anymore. In fact, he didn't want to. "I've been thinking a lot about where we're headed," Musk began, addressing the room with a quiet but steady voice. "For years, I've been pushing us forward at a relentless pace. I've been the one making the big decisions, the one who sets the vision, the one who expects everyone to follow suit. But that has to change. I'm not the only one who has ideas, and I'm not the only one who can lead. We have an incredible team, and it's time for all of us to step up." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Some of the senior engineers at SpaceX exchanged glances, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. It wasn't often that Elon Musk opened up like this. He was known for his confident, no-nonsense approach, and his openness was a rare sight. "We're not just building rockets or electric cars," Musk continued. "We're building a future. A future where collaboration, trust, and shared leadership drive us forward. From now on, I want all of you to feel empowered to take risks, to make decisions, and to lead in your own way." For the first time in a long while, Musk felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't just the figurehead of two enormous companies, he was part of something bigger. It was no longer about him. It was about the collective effort of the people around him, people who believed in the mission just as much as he did. "Remember," Musk said as the meeting came to a close, "this is a journey. A journey we're all on together. And I believe in every one of you to help us reach the stars." Musk's decision to take a step back from the day-to-day operations was met with mixed reactions in the public eye. On one hand, some investors and analysts were skeptical. They had long relied on Musk's visionary leadership and feared that loosening his grip might slow down progress. Tesla and SpaceX had thrived under his direct control, and they were uncertain about the impact of this new approach. But on the other hand, the media noticed a change in Musk's demeanor. He appeared calmer, more at peace with himself. He had gone from a man consumed by the weight of the world to a man who seemed more grounded, more focused on the bigger picture. The stories of his emotional breakthrough began to circulate, painting a portrait of a man who had learned to prioritize his mental and emotional well-being over his need for constant achievement. For Musk, the change wasn't just about optics. It was about creating a sustainable future for his companies and his own life. The pressure had been immense, but now he knew that he could still lead, and lead effectively, without sacrificing his mental health. He had found balance. As the months passed, Musk's new approach began to bear fruit. At SpaceX, engineers who had once hesitated to challenge Musk's ideas began to present their own groundbreaking solutions. Musk, now more receptive to their input, encouraged open dialogue and collaboration. The company's innovation didn't slow down, it accelerated. New designs for rockets, new ideas for Mars colonization, and breakthroughs in technology were happening at a faster pace than ever before. At Tesla, the shift in leadership was just as transformative. The team, empowered by Musk's trust in their abilities, took on more responsibility and made strides in improving the electric vehicle designs. A sense of camaraderie began to grow as the company focused not just on profits, but on creating something that would make a difference in the world. Musk had always believed that the key to success was perseverance. But now, he realized that true success was not about pushing yourself and your team to the breaking point, it was about resilience. It was about bouncing back from setbacks, learning from mistakes, and creating a culture where every person had a stake in the mission. Musk's emotional breakthrough had given him the space to realize that this wasn't just about making history, it was about making a sustainable, meaningful impact on the future. One evening, several months after his breakthrough, Musk stood alone in the middle of the SpaceX launch facility, gazing out at the launch pad. The sounds of workers packing up for the day faded into the background as he took a deep breath. The air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of pink and orange as the sun set over the horizon. In that moment, he realized that the journey had always been about more than just the destination. It was about the people he had met along the way, the lives he had touched, and the world he had hoped to build. The fine, the lawsuits, the media storms, they were all just chapters in a much larger story. And in that story, he had learned that success was not just about achieving the impossible. It was about doing so in a way that preserved the things that truly mattered: love, trust, and balance. Musk smiled to himself. For the first time in years, he was content with where he was. He was still driven, still focused on the future. But now, he understood that the future was not something to be achieved at all costs. It was something to be built, step by step, with the people who shared the same vision. As he turned to leave the launch pad, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. This was just the beginning. The stars were within reach, and this time, he wasn't reaching for them alone. Elon Musk sat in his office, the walls lined with plans for the future of Tesla and SpaceX. The paperwork was endless, the deadlines were always looming, and despite the recent changes, there was still a mountain of work to be done. But something was different this time. Musk felt a sense of peace, an inner calm, as he glanced over the new designs for the Tesla Cybertruck and the upcoming SpaceX Mars mission. He had long considered himself a man driven by purpose, by vision. But in the wake of his emotional breakthrough, he realized that his purpose wasn't just about achievement, it was about creating something that could outlast him, something that could inspire people for generations to come. The future he had spent years building was no longer something he needed to prove to the world. It was something that was already unfolding, with or without his constant micromanagement. And that realization brought with it a deep sense of responsibility. As the days turned into weeks, the effects of Musk's shift in leadership began to spread beyond just his leadership team. Employees at both SpaceX and Tesla noticed a subtle but significant change in the company culture. There was a newfound sense of ownership and accountability. Musk's decision to take a step back had allowed his employees to step forward. They began to take risks, to innovate, and to contribute ideas that were once stifled by the constant need to appease his high standards. Tesla's engineers had been quietly working on a new, more efficient battery design. Under Musk's previous leadership style, they might have hesitated to present the idea for fear of rejection or scrutiny. But now, with Musk's words fresh in their minds, they felt emboldened to show him their breakthrough. "Mr. Musk," one of the engineers said, nervously holding up a small sample of the new battery design. "We've made significant strides in battery efficiency. This could cut down the cost of production by 30% and increase the range of the cars by 40%. Musk raised an eyebrow, impressed by the design. He'd always believed in the power of innovation, but this was beyond even his expectations. "Why didn't you show me this sooner?" Musk asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "We were afraid it wasn't perfect," the engineer admitted. But after everything you said about trust and leadership, we realized we needed to take that leap. This is our contribution, and we're ready to see it through." Musk smiled, a rare, genuine smile that wasn't driven by competition or expectation, but by a simple appreciation for the work his team had done. "I'm glad you did," he said. "Now, let's make sure this gets into production. This could change everything." The changes Musk had made within his companies had begun to take root, but it wasn't just his professional life that was undergoing a transformation. His personal life, too, was beginning to find a semblance of balance. He had been distant for so long from his children, his family, and even his friends. But now, as he reflected on the conversations he'd had with Tallulah, he realized that there was more to life than just the work. He'd been so focused on building his empire that he had neglected the relationships that mattered most. But that was changing. He was reconnecting with his children, spending more time with them, and truly listening to their hopes, dreams, and concerns. One evening, as he sat with his son, XAEA-12, they watched a SpaceX launch on TV. The small boy turned to him with wide eyes. "Daddy," he said softly. "Are we going to Mars?" Musk looked at his son, the question pulling at something deep within him. The Mars mission had always been his vision, his dream. But now, as he saw the excitement in his son's eyes, he realized that it was no longer just his dream. It was their dream. It was a dream that would belong to the next generation, one that he would help shape alongside them. "Yes," Musk said, his voice firm yet filled with a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to express before. "We're going to Mars. But it's not just about getting there, son. It's about building a future where you can make your own dreams come true." SpaceX's Mars mission, the culmination of Musk's life's work, was on the horizon. The designs for the spacecraft, the technologies required, and the plans for colonization were all in place. But for the first time, Musk realized that it wasn't just about getting people to Mars. It was about ensuring that humanity could survive and thrive once they arrived. He sat down with his team, all of them gathered around a massive table, the blueprints of the Mars colony laid out before them. "This isn't just about sending humans to Mars," Musk said, his voice steady, filled with purpose. "This is about ensuring that we can create a sustainable society. We need to think beyond rockets. We need to think about agriculture, water, energy, everything that makes a planet livable." The team nodded, understanding the gravity of Musk's words. This wasn't just an ambitious project, it was the future of humanity. And Musk knew that, for the first time in his career, he wasn't just leading a company to achieve incredible things. He was leading humanity into a new era. The realization hit him, his breakthrough wasn't just personal. It was collective. The emotional shift he had experienced had allowed him to see the bigger picture. The mission to Mars wasn't just a way for him to cement his legacy. It was a way for all of humanity to become something greater than the sum of its parts. As the launch date drew closer, Musk's focus shifted. The teams at SpaceX and Tesla were working tirelessly, but there was no longer the same urgency that had once driven him. The pace had slowed, not out of complacency, but out of intention. They were no longer rushing to meet impossible deadlines. They were working carefully, thoughtfully, with a long-term vision in mind. Musk had once viewed every obstacle as something to be conquered, every problem as something to be solved. Now, he understood that sometimes the best way to move forward was to step back, to listen, and to trust in the people around him. The launch of the Mars mission was no longer a personal triumph for Musk. It was a triumph for everyone who had been a part of it. And as he stood on the launch pad, watching the rockets take off into the vast expanse of space, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. Elon Musk had always been driven by the need to change the world. But now, he understood that true change didn't come from simply pushing harder, faster, and farther. It came from listening, learning, and building a future that was sustainable, inclusive, and shared by all. As the rockets soared into the night sky, Musk stood with his team, his family, and the people who had believed in him from the beginning. They had all taken this journey together. And as the stars twinkled above, Musk finally understood that, for the first time, the future was not a distant dream. It was a reality in the making. The journey to Mars was supposed to be the culmination of everything Elon Musk had worked toward. The launch date was set, the spacecraft was ready, and the world had its eyes on SpaceX. This was the moment. But in the world of space exploration, nothing was ever certain. It happened late one evening, when Musk was sitting alone in his office, going through last-minute preparations for the Mars mission. His phone buzzed, the notification a jarring interruption to his peaceful routine. He glanced at the screen, urgent, spacecraft anomaly detected. His heart skipped a beat. An anomaly meant a potential disaster, and disaster was something he had no patience for. He immediately dialed the number for Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO, who was leading the final phase of the Mars mission. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before she picked up. Elon, Gwynne's voice was strained. "We've got a problem. The propulsion system is showing signs of malfunction. If we don't fix this now, the launch could be delayed indefinitely, or worse, it could fail." Musk felt the room spin slightly. This was the last thing they needed. The stakes couldn't have been higher. There was no room for failure, not now. Not after everything they had built. "I'm on my way," Musk replied, his voice steady, but his mind racing. Within an hour, Musk was at SpaceX's headquarters, surrounded by engineers and technicians who were working feverishly to assess the issue. The propulsion system, a vital part of the spacecraft designed to take astronauts to Mars, was showing signs of significant malfunction. If they couldn't resolve the problem quickly, the launch could be delayed by months, and that would set back everything. Musk stood quietly at the center of the chaos, his mind focused. He had faced challenges before, but this felt different. This was no longer just about technology or money. This was about the future, humanity's future. Every decision he made now would determine whether the dream of reaching Mars could still become a reality. Gwynne approached him with a worried look on her face. "Elon, we've identified the root cause of the malfunction. It's a flaw in the engine's fuel system. The problem is deeper than we first realized. If we don't resolve this quickly, we risk the entire mission." Musk looked at the team, at the people who had dedicated their lives to this mission. He knew that they couldn't afford to fail. The pressure was immense. But now, in this moment of crisis, he understood something important. It wasn't just his responsibility to fix the problem, it was their collective responsibility. The entire team was in this together. "We can do this," Musk said, his voice firm. "Let's solve it. We've overcome worse." For hours, the engineers worked tirelessly, running tests and recalibrating the propulsion system. Musk paced around, occasionally stepping in to offer a suggestion or provide some encouragement. He had always been a visionary, a man who saw the big picture. But now, he was learning to trust his team to take care of the technical details. He knew the mission was in good hands, and he had to let them do their job. The hours stretched into the early morning, and the exhaustion began to set in. The room buzzed with energy, but the weight of the task at hand hung over everyone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the engineers gave him the news they had all been waiting for: the propulsion system was fixed. The anomaly had been corrected, and the spacecraft was ready to proceed with the final checks. Musk let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked around the room at his team, and for the first time in a long while, he saw not just employees but collaborators, people who had shared his vision and worked tirelessly to make it a reality. "We did it," he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This is what we're made of." The news of the near setback broke the following day, sending waves of concern through the media and the public. The stakes of the Mars mission had always been high, but now the world was aware of just how fragile the process could be. Musk was ready for the scrutiny, but he knew it would be a challenge to maintain the trust of the public and investors. The press conference was held at SpaceX's headquarters, with cameras flashing and reporters eager to get Musk's response. He walked up to the podium, his usual confidence tempered by the weight of the recent crisis. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just speaking as a businessman or a visionary. He was speaking as someone who had been through a real challenge and had emerged with something valuable to say. The mission to Mars is not without risks, Musk began, his voice clear and steady. The road to the future is never easy. There will always be setbacks. There will always be challenges. But that is what makes this mission so important. It's not just about reaching Mars, it's about learning from every obstacle and continuing to push forward. The road ahead is still uncertain, but I believe in this team. I believe in this mission. And I believe in humanity's ability to achieve the impossible. As Musk finished speaking, he could feel the weight of the moment settle over him. He had faced countless challenges before, but this was different. The world was watching, and the pressure was immense. But he had also learned something vital, that sometimes setbacks are the greatest teachers. They were what made success so sweet, so meaningful. Later that evening, as Musk sat in his office, the glow of the city lights outside the window, he took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. The emotional breakthrough, the team's unwavering support, the unrelenting pursuit of a dream that sometimes seemed impossible, it had all led to this moment. He had always been a man who thrived under pressure, but now he understood that pressure wasn't something to be feared. It was something to embrace. Setbacks weren't the end, they were simply detours on the road to success. The near failure of the propulsion system had been a humbling experience. It had reminded him that the future wasn't something that could be rushed or forced. It had to be earned, step by step. And with the team at his side, Musk knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the days passed and the final preparations for the Mars mission resumed, Musk felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about sending people to Mars, it was about proving that humanity could overcome anything, no matter the odds. As the Mars mission launch drew closer, Elon Musk's life began to settle into a strange routine. The constant chaos and tension of the past few months had given way to a quiet sense of anticipation. The critical systems were all in place, the spacecraft was operational, and the astronauts had completed their training. SpaceX was ready. But Musk knew that the calm before the storm was always the most fragile. Musk spent much of his time at his desk, reviewing the final plans and checking in with his key team members. It was hard to shake the feeling that something unexpected was just around the corner, but he was more confident than ever in his team's abilities. The incident with the propulsion system had reminded him of one thing: space exploration was never easy. It required resilience, dedication, and a willingness to adapt to unforeseen challenges. But that didn't mean he was without his doubts. Even though everything was on track, the magnitude of the mission weighed heavily on his mind. This wasn't just a regular project, this was humanity's next giant leap. Musk's drive to succeed had never been more palpable, but now, it came with a sense of humility he hadn't felt before. It was late one evening when Musk received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, yet different from the ones he usually heard from his team. "Elon, it's Tallulah," came the soft, familiar voice of his ex-wife. There was a pause, as if she were weighing her words carefully before continuing. "I know you've been busy, but I wanted to check in. We haven't really talked in a while." Musk was taken aback, unsure of what to say. Their relationship had always been complicated, full of tension and unresolved emotions. But there was a vulnerability in her voice now that caught him off guard. "I didn't realize how much I missed our conversations," Tallulah continued. "I've been following everything with SpaceX, and I know how important this Mars mission is to you. It's a big moment. But I just wanted to remind you, that even in the midst of all this, you don't have to do it alone. We're all here for you, Elon. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." Musk leaned back in his chair, absorbing her words. In the past, he would have dismissed them as distractions, just another attempt to pull him away from his work. But now, after everything he had learned about trust and emotional connection, he found himself listening intently. "You're right," Musk finally said. I've been so focused on the mission that I haven't really taken a moment to think about everything else. But I know you're right. I'm not alone in this. There was a brief silence, and then Tallulah spoke again, her tone lighter this time. I'm proud of you, Elon. I think you're on the right path. But don't forget that there's more to life than just achieving your dreams. It's the people you care about who will make all of this truly meaningful. Her words echoed in Musk's mind long after they hung up. For so long, he had focused solely on his work, the world-changing vision that kept him up at night. But now, in this quiet moment, he realized that there were things that mattered even more than his mission. There were connections, relationships, and emotions that he had long neglected. The morning of the Mars mission launch was calm, almost eerily so. The sun was rising over the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, casting long shadows over the sprawling complex. The team had already completed all the final checks, and the spacecraft was positioned on the launch pad, ready to soar into the unknown. Musk stood outside, watching the rocket as it towered over him. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for, a dream that had taken decades to realize. But as the moment of truth approached, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. There was always the possibility of something going wrong. Space travel was risky by nature, and there was no guarantee that everything would go according to plan. He turned to Gwynne Shotwell, who was standing beside him, her expression focused but calm. "How are we looking?" he asked. "Everything's ready," she replied. "We've double-checked every system. The astronauts are on board, and the countdown is underway. All systems are go." Musk nodded, but his mind kept wandering back to his conversation with Tallulah. For the first time in years, he was aware of the importance of the people in his life. This mission was his legacy, but the people around him, his family, his team, the astronauts, were what made this journey possible. They were the ones who had stood by him through the highs and lows, and they were the ones who would ensure that his vision would live on. As the countdown to launch began, Musk felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had done everything he could. Now, it was in the hands of those around him. The engineers, the astronauts, and even the people who supported him from afar, all of them had played a part in this moment. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the ground beneath Musk's feet vibrated as the countdown reached its final seconds. The roar of the rocket engines filled the air, drowning out everything else as the spacecraft slowly lifted off the ground. Musk watched in awe as the rocket ascended into the sky, piercing the clouds and racing toward the stars. This wasn't just a technological achievement. This was a testament to human perseverance, to the belief that the impossible could be made real. For a brief moment, he felt a deep sense of connection to everything that had led him to this point, the countless hours of work, the sacrifices, the failures, and the triumphs. This moment was not just his. It belonged to everyone who had contributed to the mission. It belonged to humanity itself. The rocket continued to climb higher and higher, disappearing into the sky. Musk stood in silence, his heart pounding in his chest. He had done it. They had done it. As the rocket cleared the atmosphere and began its journey to Mars, Musk stood quietly on the launch pad, his thoughts heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. The mission was far from over, but it had taken the first, critical step toward changing the course of human history. But Musk knew that this moment, this journey, was only the beginning. There was so much more to accomplish, so much more to learn. The challenges ahead were immense, but for the first time in a long while, he felt prepared to face them, not just as a leader, but as someone who understood the importance of connection, of trust, and of humility. He turned to Gwynne Shotwell, who had been standing silently beside him throughout the launch. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Musk said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet excitement. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Yes, Elon. It's just the beginning." And for the first time in a long time, Musk truly believed that the best was yet to come. The first days after the launch were a whirlwind of media coverage, technical evaluations, and countless briefings. SpaceX had just crossed an unimaginable threshold, sending a spacecraft on its way to Mars. Yet for Elon Musk, the exhilaration of the launch quickly gave way to a gnawing feeling in his gut. The mission was now out of his hands, but the next phase of the journey brought with it an entirely new set of challenges. And while the world watched in awe, Musk knew that the hardest work was still ahead. It wasn't just about the technology anymore. The mission to Mars was as much about humanity's faith in the impossible as it was about the quest for knowledge. And that, Musk knew, would come with its own set of expectations. In the days following the launch, the excitement was palpable. Yet, as always, with great success came the inevitable scrutiny. The media, who had once hailed Musk as a visionary, now turned a more critical eye on his every move. SpaceX's Mars mission was groundbreaking, but it also presented an entirely new set of risks that no one had fully understood. The press conferences, once filled with Musk's confident assertions about the future of humanity, had now become battlegrounds. Questions about the mission's feasibility dominated every interview. Skepticism was growing. What if the spacecraft malfunctioned mid-flight? One reporter asked at a press briefing. What happens if SpaceX's technology doesn't hold up? Musk's response was always the same. We will face challenges. We will encounter setbacks. But that is the price of progress. Space exploration isn't about certainty, it's about pushing forward despite the unknown. But the questions kept coming, and despite Musk's confidence, the weight of the skepticism began to settle in. For the first time, he started to question his own certainty. Were they truly ready for what lay ahead? One evening, alone in his office, Musk couldn't help but replay the questions over and over in his mind. The excitement of the launch seemed distant now. The technical team had reassured him that everything was proceeding as planned, but the voices of doubt from the media seemed to echo louder than ever. Sitting alone, Musk allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. It wasn't something he often allowed, but in the silence of his office, the pressure became almost unbearable. He reached for the framed picture on his desk, a snapshot of his children, taken years ago. It was a reminder of why he did what he did. He had always believed that the mission to Mars was about more than just technology or success. It was about leaving something for future generations, a way to ensure humanity's survival in the face of global challenges. But as the world's eyes turned increasingly critical, Musk couldn't help but wonder if the gamble was too great. Am I really doing the right thing? He whispered to himself. For a moment, he felt small and insignificant, just a man with a dream that seemed too big to achieve. But then, something shifted. The doubts were not a sign of failure, they were proof that the mission mattered. If there were no doubts, there would be no progress. Musk took a deep breath, his resolve hardening once again. He couldn't let the fear of failure dictate his path. The mission to Mars was bigger than him, bigger than any one individual. It was about humanity's future. The next morning, Musk found himself at a family dinner. It was an unusual break from his relentless schedule, but one he welcomed. It was time with his kids that reminded him why he had sacrificed so much over the years. Sitting at the table with his children, he was reminded that, despite everything, his purpose was not just about Mars or technology. It was about them. His son, Xaea-12, noticed the faraway look in his father's eyes. "Dad, are you okay?" the young boy asked, his voice small but filled with concern. Musk looked at him and smiled, a little surprised by the innocence of the question. He hadn't realized how much he'd been carrying with him, how much the weight of the Mars mission had been draining him. "I'm just thinking, buddy," Musk said softly. "Thinking about the future. About what we're trying to do with SpaceX." Xaea-12 tilted his head, as if trying to understand. "Are you going to bring us to Mars one day?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Musk chuckled softly. "Maybe one day. But I want to make sure it's a safe place for everyone first." That moment, simple as it was, reminded him of his purpose. The questions, the challenges, and the media storm, they were all secondary. The mission was about creating a better world, a future where his children and others could thrive. He couldn't let the noise distract him. Refreshed by the family dinner, Musk dove back into the mission preparations. The media scrutiny had shown no signs of slowing down, but he was resolved to continue his work. He attended meetings with engineers and scientists, going over mission protocols, checking on the status of the spacecraft, and fine-tuning every detail. The mission to Mars was far from over, but Musk's sense of determination had been reignited. At the SpaceX headquarters, the team was working around the clock, but the atmosphere had shifted. The early chaos of the launch had given way to a more focused intensity. The engineers and astronauts knew that the true test of the mission was still ahead. The spacecraft was safely en route to Mars, but they still had to get through the journey itself. Musk often found himself in quiet conversations with Gwynne Shotwell, whose pragmatic approach to leadership kept him grounded. "Elon, we're on the right track. The mission is progressing as planned. The real test will be once we start landing on Mars. We're all in this together." She was right. The real work was just beginning. But Musk had always known that nothing worth achieving came easily. He was prepared for whatever obstacles lay ahead, whether they came from the technology or the skepticism of the world. Just as Musk began to feel a sense of calm and control, a message flashed across his phone. It was from SpaceX's Mission Control Center. Something had gone wrong. The spacecraft's trajectory was off course. His heart stopped. There were so many variables, so many unknowns when sending a spacecraft to Mars. Musk rushed to the Mission Control Center, where the room was abuzz with activity. Engineers were working to assess the issue, but the data was unclear. The spacecraft was veering off course, and if they didn't correct it soon, they could lose it altogether. This was the moment Musk had feared, the first real sign of trouble. And yet, he remained calm. This was the price of progress. This was the reality of space exploration. Every step forward carried risk, but Musk was ready to face whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The panic that swept through the mission control room was palpable. Musk, normally cool under pressure, could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. For a moment, the success of the Mars mission seemed like a distant dream. The spacecraft, which had been on a steady course toward Mars, was now on a trajectory that could lead to disaster. SpaceX engineers were frantically trying to stabilize the spacecraft, but the problem wasn't immediately clear. Data was coming in from multiple channels, and every single second counted. Musk stood motionless in the corner of the control room, watching the engineers work. The once confident atmosphere had shifted to one of tension and uncertainty. "Elon, we may have a problem with the trajectory," Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO, said quietly, her face pale but composed. Musk didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the screen in front of him, watching as the spacecraft's trajectory continued to shift. "What happened?" he asked finally, his voice calm but laced with an underlying tension. "We believe it's an issue with the thrusters," one of the lead engineers said, glancing nervously at Musk. "They were supposed to make a course correction, but the burn didn't execute properly. The spacecraft is now off course. If we don't fix this soon, we'll miss Mars completely, and the mission could fail." Musk's mind raced. The thrusters were essential to guiding the spacecraft into Mars orbit. If they couldn't regain control, the mission would be a complete loss. It was the worst-case scenario. "You have to get those thrusters working," Musk said, his voice firm despite the weight of the situation. "Whatever it takes." The engineers scrambled, and Musk watched intently, feeling every second slip by like an eternity. This wasn't just about technology, it was about something far bigger. The future of human exploration was on the line. As the minutes ticked by, the sense of urgency in the control room grew. Engineers, normally calm under pressure, were visibly anxious, their eyes glued to their screens as they worked to resolve the issue. Musk stood in the center of the room, his mind racing, thinking through every possible solution. There was no room for error. If they couldn't fix the issue now, there might not be another chance. "Elon, we're getting close," Gwyn said, her voice strained. "We've isolated the issue with the thrusters. The fuel lines were slightly clogged, but we've managed to clear them. We're preparing to make another burn in a few minutes. If it works, we should be able to correct the trajectory." Musk felt a small glimmer of hope. The engineers had done their best to address the issue, but there was still a long way to go. The spacecraft had been drifting for several minutes now, and while the problem had been identified, it still wasn't guaranteed that the course correction would work. He glanced over at the clock on the wall. Every second was critical. "We need this to work," Musk muttered under his breath. The weight of the world felt like it was on his shoulders. "Make sure the burn is flawless." The next few minutes felt like an eternity. The engineers were working in perfect synchronization, each one performing a precise task to get the spacecraft back on track. Musk's pulse quickened as he watched the countdown to the burn. The fate of the mission rested on this one crucial moment. "Elon, the burn will begin in 3, 2, 1, now." Gwyn called out. On the screen, the spacecraft's thrusters fired, and for a brief moment, the entire control room fell silent, as if holding its collective breath. The seconds stretched on, and slowly, the spacecraft's trajectory began to adjust. It was a small shift at first, but it was enough to show that the burn had worked. The spacecraft was beginning to realign with its path to Mars. Musk felt his shoulders relax for the first time in what seemed like forever. It wasn't over yet, but they had made it through the worst of it. The mission was back on track. "Status?" Musk asked, still sounding composed, though his heart was racing. "We're good," Gwyn replied, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "We're back on course. We'll continue monitoring, but everything looks stable now." Musk nodded. It wasn't a victory just yet, but it was a critical moment of survival. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Nice work," Musk said, glancing around the room. "Everyone did their job. Now, let's keep it going." The room slowly began to settle, the energy shifting from a tense frenzy to a cautious optimism. The engineers exchanged relieved glances, and there was a quiet murmur of approval. As the spacecraft's trajectory was corrected and the mission entered a safer phase, Musk took a moment to step outside. The air outside the building felt cooler, and he walked aimlessly, trying to clear his mind. The sky above seemed vast and endless, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to reflect on what had just transpired. Space exploration was never going to be easy. It was never going to be without risks. But that was the price of pushing boundaries. The successful burn was a reminder that even in the face of near disaster, there was always a way forward. The spacecraft was back on track, and the mission had been saved, for now. But the journey to Mars would still be long, and the challenges would continue. Musk looked up at the stars in the night sky, feeling a deep connection to them. They had been the source of his dreams for as long as he could remember. They had called to him since his childhood, urging him to believe in the impossible. And now, standing on the threshold of that impossible dream, he realized just how much responsibility weighed on his shoulders. That night, as Musk lay in bed, he thought about the astronauts on board the spacecraft. He knew that their journey was only just beginning, and the road ahead would be fraught with more obstacles. But what weighed on him even more was the human element of the mission, the people who were willing to take such a monumental risk for the sake of exploration. He had worked tirelessly to get to this point, but it was the astronauts who were the true pioneers. They were the ones who would feel the isolation of space, who would face dangers he couldn't even imagine. Their bravery was what made the mission truly remarkable. It wasn't about the technology or the achievement, it was about the human spirit and the willingness to face the unknown. Musk turned over in bed and stared at the ceiling. The future of humanity was on the line. And it was that future, the possibility of human life on Mars, that kept him going. Every risk, every challenge, was worth it if it meant pushing the boundaries of what humans could achieve. Days turned into weeks, and the spacecraft was now well on its way to Mars. The engineers at SpaceX had successfully corrected the trajectory issue, but Musk knew that the real challenges were still to come. The path ahead was still full of uncertainty. There were many more hurdles to overcome, and they were all equally dangerous. Every second, every decision, would bring them closer to success, or failure. The mission had reached a critical stage. With the spacecraft in space, the pressure was mounting. The world was watching, and every move they made was under scrutiny. The task at hand was no longer just about technology. It was about convincing the world that humanity could truly reach for the stars. Musk had always believed in his mission. The drive to make life multiplanetary wasn't just about space exploration, it was about securing the future of humanity. But now, as the mission progressed, he was beginning to feel the weight of his own ambitions in ways he hadn't anticipated. The media, which had once hailed SpaceX's mission as a revolutionary achievement, began to shift their tone. The earlier excitement had given way to more pointed questions and criticisms. The road to Mars was littered with challenges, many of which had yet to be fully realized. And the world wanted answers. Is SpaceX really prepared for the long-term challenges of Mars colonization? One reporter asked during a live broadcast. Given the recent issues with the spacecraft's trajectory, how can we be sure that Mars is even a viable destination? The barrage of critical questions had become a constant for Musk. The same media outlets that had once praised his vision now questioned his judgment. And although Musk had built a reputation for being unshakable in the face of criticism, these new challenges were beginning to take their toll. As the mission continued, Musk's personal life began to feel the strain of his relentless work. His relationships, particularly with his family, were becoming more distant. He found himself spending less time with his children and more time in meetings, managing the growing complexities of the mission. The balance he had once tried to maintain between work and personal life was now tipping precariously toward work. One evening, after an intense day of briefings and technical updates, Musk found himself alone in his office, staring at the monitor. The words of a recent interview replayed in his mind: "What's the point of all this? If it costs you everything, is it really worth it?" He had often wondered that himself. What was the true cost of his ambitions? Was the vision of a multiplanetary future worth sacrificing so much in the present? The emotional toll was real, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was closer than ever to something monumental. Later that evening, Musk's phone rang. It was a call he had been dreading. It was from his ex-wife, Tallulah Riley, who had always been a steady presence in his life. She had a way of cutting through his bravado and getting to the heart of the matter. "Elon, we need to talk," Tallulah said. Her voice was calm but firm. "I can tell you're stressed. But you can't keep doing this. Not at the expense of everything else." Musk felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on the mission that he hadn't realized how much he had distanced himself from the people who mattered most. "I know," Musk replied quietly. "But this mission, it's bigger than anything I've ever done. It's bigger than me." "I get it, Elon. But you can't keep putting your whole life on hold for it. At some point, you need to take a step back and remember what really matters." There was a long pause on the line. Musk's thoughts raced as he processed her words. The pressure of the Mars mission had consumed him, but she was right. No matter how important the mission was, he couldn't lose himself in the process. He had to find a way to balance the ambition for humanity's future with his own personal well-being. As the conversation ended, Musk sat back in his chair, letting the weight of Tallulah's words sink in. He had always known that the path to Mars was not going to be easy, but he hadn't realized just how much it would cost him personally. In the days that followed, Musk made a conscious effort to spend more time with his family. He took calls from his children more often, catching up on their lives, even if it was just for a few minutes. He began to delegate more responsibilities to trusted team members, knowing that he couldn't carry the weight of the mission alone. Yet, despite these small steps toward balance, Musk remained fully committed to the mission. He had a new sense of clarity, a recognition that while the journey to Mars was important, it couldn't define his entire life. The mission continued, and the spacecraft was drawing closer to Mars. But with each passing day, the challenges seemed to grow. SpaceX had overcome the initial technical issues, but the real test was just beginning. Musk knew that there was no turning back now. The mission had reached a tipping point, a point where failure was no longer an option. As the team worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase of the mission, Musk could feel the pressure building once again. Every decision, every move, would be scrutinized. There was no room for error. The eyes of the world were on them, and the weight of that scrutiny was heavier than ever. But Musk was no stranger to pressure. He had always thrived in the face of adversity, and this was no different. He may have questioned himself in moments of doubt, but deep down, he knew that he was on the right path. Mars was within reach. And with it, the future of humanity. As SpaceX entered the final stretch toward Mars, the anticipation was palpable. News outlets, social media, and everyday people were all watching, eager to see whether Musk's vision would succeed. The world was on the edge of its seat, waiting to witness history in the making. Musk, for all the doubts and challenges, stood resolute. He had come too far to back down now. The tipping point had arrived. It was time to show the world what humanity was capable of. And for Musk, that meant giving everything he had to make sure the mission succeeded, no matter the cost. As the spacecraft neared Mars, the sense of anticipation within the mission control room was almost unbearable. SpaceX's engineers, astronauts, and executives were all watching the same screens, their eyes fixed on the data streaming in. Every piece of information could make or break the mission. The critical moment was fast approaching, Mars was in sight, and every decision now carried the weight of history. Musk had always been someone who thrived in moments of extreme pressure, but this time, even he could feel the toll of what had been a relentless pursuit. His mind had never stopped racing. Every second of the journey, every obstacle, every triumph had been a step closer to the impossible. Yet, despite the strides they'd made, Mars was still a vast unknown. In the chaos of the control room, Musk took a moment to step away from the screens and take a deep breath. Outside, the quiet hum of the night contrasted sharply with the high-stakes environment he had just left behind. He walked to the edge of the complex and stood in solitude, looking out at the sky. He had spent so many years looking up, dreaming of the stars, of Mars, that now, as the moment for human history was approaching, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He wasn't just Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, or the creator of Tesla. In this moment, he was simply a man who had dreamed of this day since he was a child. Yet even amidst the awe, there was a deep sense of unease. Musk knew that getting to Mars was only the beginning. He had always said that the journey was as important as the destination, but even he couldn't ignore the enormity of what lay ahead. The challenge of landing on Mars was one thing. Living there, surviving there, that was a whole different game. Just as Musk began to let his mind wander, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a call from one of his close advisors, Jim. Musk hesitated before answering. He didn't want to be disturbed in the rare moment of quiet, but something told him this call would be important. "Elon, we have a problem," Jim said urgently as soon as the line connected. "The burn sequence we had planned to slow the spacecraft down isn't going as expected. The thrusters are malfunctioning again." Musk's pulse quickened. His worst fear was coming true. The same technical failure that had almost derailed the mission weeks ago was threatening the most critical phase of the journey. "How bad is it?" Musk asked, trying to steady his breath. "We're going to need to reroute a backup thruster system, but it's going to take time," Jim explained. "We've only got a small window to correct the course, or we'll overshoot Mars. I'm talking about the difference between landing safely and flying past it entirely." The cold weight of the situation hit Musk in the chest. He had spent so long imagining this moment, landing on Mars, achieving the impossible, but it was all slipping through his fingers. He couldn't allow that to happen. Make it happen, Musk said, his voice sharper than he intended. I want all hands on deck. Time is not on our side. The team was already in full action mode. Engineers and astronauts alike scrambled to reroute and recalibrate, their every move tense and deliberate. The mission control room had turned into a flurry of activity as new systems were brought online. Musk was right back at the heart of the chaos, the tension in the air almost tangible. He stood at the center, pacing slowly, his mind replaying the many hours of preparation that had led them to this point. The team worked tirelessly, ensuring that every thruster was aligned, every engine functional. It was a race against time. You need to get this right, Gwyn, Musk said, turning to Gwyn Shotwell, who had been leading the operations. We've come too far for this to fail now. She gave him a firm nod, her face a mask of determination. We're on it, Elon. We'll make it work. As the engineers continued their work, Musk felt the weight of his own doubts creeping in. What if they failed? What if all of their efforts, all the resources, all the lives that had been devoted to this moment, were lost in the final stretch? But then, just as quickly, he shook himself from the negative thoughts. He had been through worse, and he had faced far greater odds before. Musk wasn't one to quit. He wasn't one to let the pressure of the moment break him. Keep the focus, Musk said to himself under his breath. Don't lose it now. Not after all this time. He realized that he couldn't allow fear to cloud his judgment. This mission wasn't just about getting to Mars, it was about proving that humanity could rise to the occasion, no matter how impossible the challenge seemed. As the spacecraft approached the Martian atmosphere, the tension in the room was palpable. Musk could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the countdown for the burn began. The team was ready. The backup thruster systems had been activated, and all they needed now was for the spacecraft to slow down just enough to enter Mars orbit. The screens flashed with real-time data, showing the burn sequence preparing to execute. Everyone in the control room held their breath. Burn sequence in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now. Gwyn called out. The thrusters fired, and Musk's eyes fixed on the screens as the spacecraft's descent began to stabilize. Slowly, incrementally, the data showed signs of improvement. The spacecraft was responding. It was working. As the engineers continued their work, Musk let out a sigh of relief, though he knew it wasn't over yet. They had made it through another critical phase. But there were still hurdles ahead, Mars' atmosphere, the landing, and the ever-present threat of unforeseen complications. As the spacecraft continued its approach to Mars, Musk took a brief moment to step outside again. The night sky stretched out above him, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to simply take in the moment. He had always been driven by a desire to reach the stars. And now, in the quiet stillness of the night, he realized that the journey itself had transformed him. It wasn't just about getting to Mars anymore, it was about understanding that sometimes, the challenges we face along the way are what define us. The uncertainty, the setbacks, the sacrifices, these were all part of the greater story he was helping to write. He had dedicated his life to this mission, and no matter the outcome, he knew that he had given everything to push humanity forward. Mars was within reach. And whether they succeeded or not, he had already achieved something far greater than he could have ever imagined. The spacecraft was now just hours away from Mars. The tension in the mission control room was nearly unbearable. Engineers, astronauts, and SpaceX's top leadership were all fixated on the data streaming in. Every second felt like an eternity. Time seemed to stretch, the ticking of the clock now a reminder of how close they were to what could either be a historic achievement or a catastrophic failure. Elon Musk stood at the center of the room, his face a mask of concentration. His usual confident demeanor was tinged with the weight of the moment. After years of relentless effort, after billions of dollars invested and countless obstacles overcome, the success or failure of this mission would be determined in the next few hours. Despite the pressure, Musk remained eerily calm. His eyes flicked over the data screens, watching the real-time updates as the spacecraft's trajectory was adjusted. The backup systems that had been implemented to counter the earlier thruster malfunction were holding steady, and the team was working seamlessly to keep everything on course. Yet, even as he held his breath, Musk knew that this moment wasn't just about the mission. It wasn't even just about Mars. This was about proving to the world that SpaceX could do what no one else had ever dared to attempt. But beneath that drive for success, there was a deeper feeling, a mixture of pride and fear that he couldn't shake. What would it mean for humanity if they failed now? Just as the final preparations were being made for the descent, Musk's phone rang. He glanced down at the screen. It was a number he hadn't seen in years, his father. He hesitated. Their relationship had always been strained. Elon Musk, his father, had been a difficult and distant figure in his life. Growing up, Elon had struggled with feelings of inadequacy, believing that nothing he did would ever be enough to earn his father's approval. But now, as the mission neared its conclusion, Musk couldn't ignore the weight of that call. "Hello." Musk answered, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. "Elon," came his father's voice, rough and measured. "I'm watching. I know you've had your doubts about me, but I want you to know something. You're doing something that no one else ever had the guts to do. I may not have always been there for you, but I see what you've built. And it's impressive." Musk was taken aback. His father's words were unexpected, and for a moment, he was at a loss for how to respond. Elon Musk had never been one to show pride or affection, at least not in any way Elon could understand. "Thanks," Musk said quietly, his mind racing. "I appreciate that. It's been a long road." "I know," Elon's voice softened. "I'm proud of you, son. No matter what happens with this mission, you've already done something great. You're changing the world." The words hung in the air. For the first time, Elon felt a small measure of peace. His father's approval, while fleeting and complicated, gave him a sense of closure. He didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. He had already done the impossible. The spacecraft was now entering Mars' atmosphere. The final countdown had begun, and all attention in the room was on the monitor showing the descent trajectory. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The engineers worked furiously, making last-minute adjustments as they prepared for the critical landing sequence. Musk's mind raced, recalling the countless simulations and rehearsals that had taken place over the years. Every contingency had been accounted for, every risk analyzed. But there was no way to truly prepare for the unpredictability of space. Mars had its own rules. For a few seconds, everything was eerily still. Then, the system alert sounded. The thrusters fired. The spacecraft's descent was far from smooth. Musk could feel the tension mounting as the feedback from the thrusters began to stabilize. Then, the ship hit a rough patch. The landing gear system wasn't locking into place correctly. The screens flickered with alarming messages, warning of an imbalance in the pressure. "Is it going to hold?" Musk asked, his voice tight, barely above a whisper. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, stepped forward with a calm expression but a quick flick of worry in her eyes. "We're monitoring it," she said, her voice steady but with the edge of urgency that only someone with years of space industry experience could hide. "We've got redundancy in place. It's just a matter of recalibration." Musk's eyes never left the monitor. The control room was silent except for the sound of the team's fingers on keyboards, typing furiously to adjust the trajectory. As the spacecraft descended further, the surface of Mars became more visible. The red planet loomed large, like an ancient beast, waiting to see if they could tame it. The final few hundred feet felt like an eternity. The spacecraft's descent slowed further, its engines groaning under the stress of the atmosphere. Musk's heart pounded in his chest. The entire room was focused, their eyes glued to the screens as the final moments ticked away. 70 meters, someone muttered from the back of the room. 50 meters, 30 meters, the countdown was accelerating, but so was the spacecraft's descent. Musk's breath caught in his throat. And then it happened, the engines roared to life as the spacecraft's landing gear made contact with the Martian soil. For a moment, it felt as if time stopped. Everyone in the room held their breath. The red dust billowed out from under the landing feet, settling over the spacecraft as it steadied itself on the ground. A loud cheer erupted from the engineers. "We've landed," Gwyn said softly, her voice full of awe. Musk stood in the midst of the celebration, but his mind was elsewhere. His eyes were fixed on the screen, the first human-made spacecraft to ever land on Mars standing proudly in the Martian dust. The magnitude of the moment was staggering, and yet, Musk felt strangely still. His life's work, his relentless drive, the years of sacrifice, the criticism, the doubts, had all led to this. But somehow, it didn't feel like an end. It felt like the beginning of something far bigger than any single person could comprehend. The mission was a success, but Musk knew that this was just the first step. The work ahead was even greater. The dream of a multiplanetary future wasn't just a vision anymore. It was real. The applause in mission control was deafening. Engineers, astronauts, and SpaceX staff cheered and high-fived as they celebrated their success. The first human-made spacecraft had successfully landed on Mars. The impossible had been achieved. Musk, standing at the front of the room, felt a brief wave of elation wash over him. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, letting the enormity of the achievement sink in. He had done it. The long hours of sleepless nights, the constant scrutiny, the doubts, none of it mattered anymore. They had landed on Mars. But as the cheers subsided, Musk's mind shifted. His work wasn't done. This was only the beginning. Minutes after the initial celebrations, the adrenaline started to fade, and the reality of what had just been accomplished began to settle in. The spacecraft was on Mars, but it wasn't yet the time to pop champagne bottles. Now, it was about survival. It wasn't enough to simply land, they had to prove that humans could live and thrive on Mars. "Okay, team," Musk said, his voice now carrying the weight of the mission ahead. "The next phase is starting. We've got to start thinking long-term. This mission is only a small part of what we're trying to do here. I'm not satisfied with just a landing. I want a permanent presence. A thriving colony." Gwyn Shotwell stepped forward, a look of determination on her face. "We're ready to start the first stages of building the habitat. But we need more than just a few astronauts to make this work. We need infrastructure, supplies, and long-term sustainability." Musk nodded. He had anticipated this. "We'll need to establish a way to mine resources from Mars itself. We can't just keep sending supplies from Earth. This is about building a self-sustaining future for humanity." Back on Mars, the crew of astronauts was preparing for their first steps outside the spacecraft. The pressure on them was unimaginable. They were about to become the first humans to ever set foot on another planet. The entire world was watching. This wasn't just a personal achievement, it was a defining moment for all of humanity. Inside the spacecraft, the lead astronaut, Samantha Lawson, was adjusting her suit one last time. She glanced at her fellow astronauts, Javier, Kira, and Marcus, all looking as ready as they could be for this unprecedented moment. "Ready?" Samantha's voice came through the comms. Her team responded with a unified "ready." Musk watched the live feed from Earth as the astronauts slowly began to open the hatch. The Martian landscape stretched before them, an alien world of red dust and rocky plains. For a moment, it felt as though the entire universe held its breath. Samantha was the first to step out, her boots making contact with the Martian soil. It was a historic moment. The cameras captured every detail as she planted her foot on the surface. Slowly, she looked back at the crew, and then at the landscape stretching out before her. It was silent except for the crackling radio communication. "This is it," Samantha's voice came through the comms, barely above a whisper. "We're on Mars." Back on Earth, the reaction was explosive. News outlets across the world carried live updates. Social media was flooded with images of the astronauts stepping onto Mars. It was a moment that transcended borders, a victory for all of humanity. People from all walks of life were sharing in the success, proud of what had been accomplished. Musk watched the live broadcasts with a quiet satisfaction. The world had been watching, but now they had to step up. Now, the challenge was to show that humanity could not only reach Mars but could stay there. As the astronauts settled into their temporary habitat, the next phase of the mission began, preparing for long-term survival. The habitat was designed to withstand the harsh Martian environment, with enough supplies to last for months. But Musk and his team knew that this wasn't enough. They needed to develop sustainable life support systems, mining equipment, and a way to grow food on Mars. "We need to start experimenting with Mars soil," Gwynn said as she studied the first data coming back from the Martian environment. "If we can figure out how to grow crops, we'll have the foundation for a self-sustaining colony." Musk was already thinking about the next phase. His mind was racing with ideas, from building underground cities to creating artificial atmospheres. There was so much to do, but he was confident that the team was up to the task. "We're in this for the long haul," Musk said. "It's not about a quick mission. It's about making Mars habitable for future generations. We're building a future." Just as things seemed to be going according to plan, disaster struck. A malfunction in the life support system sent alarms blaring throughout the control room. The astronauts on Mars were in immediate danger. Musk's heart skipped a beat as he watched the data on his screen. "Report," he barked, his voice tense. "We've got a pressure leak in the habitat," one of the engineers said, eyes wide with concern. "It's contained for now, but we need to patch it immediately. If we don't, we risk compromising the entire habitat." Musk's mind raced. This was a critical moment. If they couldn't stabilize the habitat, they would be forced to abandon the mission. The lives of the astronauts were at risk. "Get them inside the emergency pod, now," Musk ordered, his voice unwavering. "We'll have to send a repair team up once we've got the pressure stabilized. No room for error." The seconds felt like minutes as the team scrambled into action. On Mars, the astronauts quickly moved into the emergency pod. The pressure inside the habitat continued to drop, but they were safe for the moment. As the emergency protocol was enacted, Musk stood in the control room, watching the feed. His breath caught in his throat. He had known the risks. He had known the dangers of space travel. But that didn't make it any easier to watch. Within hours, the emergency was over. The pressure had been stabilized, and the astronauts were back in the habitat. The repair crew was already on standby, preparing to launch a mission to fix the damage. As the immediate danger passed, Musk stood silently in the control room, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. The setback was a reminder of just how fragile the mission was. But it was also a reminder of the resilience of the team, the strength of the human spirit. They had faced countless challenges on their way to Mars, and they would face countless more. But the work would go on. Space exploration had never been easy. It was never meant to be. And Musk was determined to make it happen, no matter the cost. The atmosphere on Mars was tense, but it was not just the red dust and harsh winds outside that created this sense of unease. Inside the SpaceX control room, a quiet storm was brewing. The emergency that had just passed left its mark. Musk stood at the center of the room, his eyes flicking over the data streams, his mind spinning through what had just happened. His fingers drummed against the console, impatience and worry building. The pressure leak on Mars wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was a glaring reminder of how fragile their progress truly was. Each success was tempered by the knowledge that one small error could unravel everything. Musk could feel the weight of it, the responsibility not only to the astronauts on Mars but to every person who believed in the mission, who had invested in the dream. "Gwynn," Musk said, his voice low but urgent. "How are we looking for the repair mission?" Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, responded with a furrowed brow, reviewing the data on her screen. "We're ready. The repair team is prepped, and we've got the equipment for a quick fix. But we're going to have to move fast. The integrity of the habitat is still shaky." Musk nodded grimly. "How long do we have?" "Hours," Gwynne said. "Not days. We have hours before the environment becomes too dangerous for them." Musk's gaze sharpened. The weight of the world felt heavier than ever. This was not just a mission. It was humanity's first foray into the unknown. One mistake, one failure, and everything could be lost. As he surveyed the room, Musk's mind turned inward. He had always prided himself on leading by example, staying calm in the face of adversity. But today was different. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. The survival of the astronauts, the success of the Mars mission, depended on every decision, every second of action. He couldn't afford to make the wrong move. A technician approached, breaking his thoughts. "Elon, we've got the go-ahead to launch the repair pod. We'll need you to sign off." Musk turned to face the technician. The man was young, his eyes wide with the intensity of the moment. Musk saw the same resolve in him that he had seen in so many others when they were on the brink of something incredible, or something catastrophic. Without a word, Musk took the pen from the technician's hand and signed the authorization with a steady hand. The decision was made. Now, it was up to the team to execute flawlessly. On Mars, the crew braced for the repair mission. Samantha Lawson, the lead astronaut, was the first to speak over the comms. Her voice, though calm, carried an undercurrent of tension. "We're good to go here. The pressure is holding steady for now, but we're going to need the repair pod up here fast." The crew had been trained for emergencies like this, but there was no training that could fully prepare them for the reality of being light years from Earth, with a ticking clock and the very environment around them threatening to consume them. "Roger that, Samantha. We're launching the pod now," came the response from Mission Control on Earth. Minutes felt like hours. As the repair pod shot through space, the crew on Mars continued their work in the habitat, managing the fragile pressure system and keeping their eyes on the dwindling resources. Time was a luxury they didn't have. Back on Earth, the mission control room was alive with the hum of activity. Engineers were monitoring every detail, working in lockstep with the astronauts. Gwynne Shotwell, ever the calm presence, was leading the charge, orchestrating the repair mission from the ground. Musk stood to the side, his arms crossed. The control room was a cacophony of voices and beeping monitors, but his mind remained fixed on the task ahead. This wasn't just a mechanical problem, it was a test of their ability to adapt under pressure, to solve problems that had never been encountered before. And as always, the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. As the repair pod neared Mars, Musk's heart rate quickened. This mission was the embodiment of everything they had worked for, every failure, every setback, every moment of doubt was leading up to this point. This was the true test of their vision. Could they really make Mars a home for humanity? Or would their ambitions be dashed in the harsh reality of the Martian frontier? Back on Mars, the astronauts could only wait and hope. Samantha Lawson watched through the observation window as the repair pod approached. The spacecraft was like a small, bright star, cutting through the Martian sky on a precise trajectory. It was their lifeline. As the pod touched down, the crew released a collective breath, their anxiety momentarily dissipating. But the real challenge lay in the execution. The repair team had to install a series of reinforcement plates and seal off the damaged section. Every move had to be precise, there could be no mistakes. "This is it," Samantha said, her voice steady. "Time to make history again." The repair pod's hatch opened, revealing the first of the specialized repair team. Clad in a second-generation spacesuit, the technician moved quickly but carefully, setting up the necessary tools. For the astronauts on the ground, the task was straightforward but still incredibly dangerous. They were relying on untested technology and the precision of the repair team to fix the pressure breach. And, as always with space missions, there was a new kind of fear. Fear of the unknown. "We're installing the sealant now," came the voice over the comms. "It's going to take a few minutes." Samantha watched intently. Her hands shook slightly, but she kept her focus. Every repair, every movement, every tool was critical. One error, and the habitat's integrity would collapse. The Martian surface, with all its beauty and desolation, would be the tomb for humanity's first attempt at interplanetary colonization. After what felt like an eternity, the sealant was in place. The reinforcement plates were set. Slowly, the pressure within the habitat began to stabilize, and the readings from mission control showed that they had successfully mitigated the worst of the breach. Pressure holding steady, Gwyn's voice crackled through the comms. "You're safe for now." A wave of relief passed over the astronauts. The repair mission had been a success, but Musk knew that this was only the first of many hurdles. Mars was a world that didn't care about their ambitions. The planet was unforgiving, and the mistakes made today could be fatal tomorrow. Later that night, after the team had patched up the immediate concerns and stabilized the habitat, Musk stood alone in the control room. The soft glow of the monitors illuminated his face as he gazed at the feed from Mars. The astronauts were asleep, finally able to rest after hours of tension and fear. Musk allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. They had survived the first great test, but he knew that more challenges would follow. Space wasn't kind, and neither was Mars. This mission was far from over, and the hard work was only just beginning. But in that moment, as he looked at the first human base on another planet, something deep within him stirred. They had done it. They had made history. The days that followed the repair mission on Mars were filled with a constant hum of activity, each success, each small victory pushing them further along the path to establishing humanity's first permanent outpost on another planet. But, even as the pressure stabilized, and the team on Mars began to settle into their routines, a new, more insidious challenge began to take shape, one that had little to do with the harsh Martian environment but everything to do with the emotional toll the mission was exacting on those involved. Back on Earth, Musk found himself buried under an overwhelming tide of decisions and constant media attention. The initial success of the Mars landing had garnered worldwide praise, but with that success came heightened expectations. Suddenly, the entire world was watching, waiting for the next step. But the pressure wasn't just external. Musk could feel it creeping in from within as well. SpaceX was on the edge of something monumental, of course, that was no secret. The mission's success had captured the hearts and imaginations of millions, but what people often forgot was that every milestone came at a cost. For Musk, this meant sleepless nights, constant problem-solving, and, as always, an overwhelming weight of responsibility that threatened to swallow him whole. He stared at the screens in front of him, watching the real-time feeds from Mars as the astronauts conducted their experiments. But his mind wasn't on their progress, it was on the cost of the venture. Space exploration was exhilarating, but it was also an extraordinarily expensive endeavor. The resources required to make Mars habitable, to build the infrastructure necessary for a permanent colony, were beyond anything anyone had imagined. Gwyn Shotwell's voice cut through his thoughts. "Elon, we need to talk about funding. The pressure's building. We're running low on some key resources, and the longer the mission goes, the more costly it becomes." He exhaled slowly, knowing exactly what she meant. The initial funding had been groundbreaking, but even billionaires had their limits. The cost of the mission, building and maintaining the outpost, sending supplies, and developing new technologies, was astronomical. Musk had already stretched his resources to their breaking point, and despite the media's adulation, the financial side of things was growing dire. "We'll make it work," Musk said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. His mind was racing, trying to calculate just how long they could sustain the mission before new funds were necessary. "But we need more support," Gwyn pressed. "We need to keep this mission alive, and to do that, we need more than just investor confidence. We need solid commitment." Musk was silent for a moment, the weight of the request settling heavily on his shoulders. He was used to walking this tightrope, balancing risk with reward, dream with reality, but this time felt different. The stakes were higher than ever before. As Musk stared at the monitors in front of him, his thoughts turned to the astronauts on Mars. The team there was enduring extreme isolation, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The vast emptiness of space was not only unforgiving in its terrain but in its silence. The planet was hostile in ways they hadn't even begun to comprehend, and each day brought new difficulties. Samantha Lawson, the lead astronaut, had been the first to step onto Mars. Her role as the first human to walk on an alien planet had made her a hero, a symbol of progress. But she was also human. And, as the days passed, the loneliness started to weigh on her. "I've never seen the sky the same way," she said softly during one of the routine comms checks. "It's hard to explain. It's beautiful in a way I never imagined, but also so isolating. You can't help but feel small, insignificant, when you look out at this place. There's nothing out there for miles. No sign of life. It's just, us." Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. The team on Earth had seen it too. There was a noticeable shift in her tone, in her words. "It's just part of the mission, Samantha," Musk replied over the comms, his voice steady. He understood, more than anyone could realize, the internal battle she was fighting. The silence, the distance from home, the pressure, it could be overwhelming. But he couldn't let that show. Leadership, especially in space, was about projecting confidence, even when he felt none himself. But as the conversation ended, and the team continued their work, Musk's worry deepened. They were on the verge of something extraordinary, but the cost was becoming clearer. It wasn't just the billions of dollars or the technological advancements, it was the mental and emotional toll that would, inevitably, be paid. Several weeks later, Samantha and her team were gearing up for another major task, constructing the first greenhouse on Mars. They needed a stable food source, and it was critical that they succeeded. The greenhouse was meant to be their first step toward a sustainable environment on Mars. Yet, as they prepared to begin the work, Samantha found herself alone in the small habitat, staring at the window that showed nothing but the stark, barren landscape. Her mind wandered. She was exhausted. The monotony of the days, the harsh reality of their isolation, had begun to erode her resolve. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep it together. It was in that moment that she let her guard down. "I'm scared," she whispered into her microphone, though the words were not intended for anyone else. She was too far away from Earth to truly seek comfort from anyone. There was no one to hold her hand, no one to reassure her that everything would be okay. But the words were caught by the comms system. Back on Earth, the transmission was received with immediate concern. Musk's eyes widened as he heard Samantha's admission. "Is she okay?" Gwyn asked, her voice laced with worry. Musk rubbed his temples, running his fingers through his hair. "She's human," he said, his voice quiet. "But we can't afford to have any cracks in the foundation. Not now. Not with everything at stake." He knew what he had to do. He quickly patched into the comm system, his voice firm but gentle. "Samantha," he said, the words traveling across space. "What you're doing, what you've accomplished, is beyond anything any of us could have imagined. But you don't have to do it alone. You've got the entire team behind you, both here and on Mars. You're not alone. We're all in this together." A long pause followed before Samantha's voice came through, quieter this time. "Thanks, Elon. It's just hard sometimes, you know." Musk didn't respond right away. He understood all too well. The conversation ended, but the weight of it stayed with Musk. He knew the cost of progress. They weren't just battling against the harsh Martian landscape, they were battling their own fears, doubts, and isolation. But it was worth it. He had always believed that the best things in life came with the highest costs. As the mission continued, the astronauts found new ways to adapt to their environment, slowly building the foundation for humanity's future on Mars. The greenhouse was established, and the first crops began to grow, slowly, but steadily. It wasn't easy, but it was working. Musk couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as he watched the footage of their progress. The first steps had been taken, but there were so many more to go. The greenhouse on Mars had become a symbol of hope. After months of hard work, the first successful crop had sprouted, a small but powerful testament to human resilience. But as Elon Musk sat at the helm of the SpaceX control room, watching the team on Mars celebrate their progress, a gnawing sense of unease lingered in his chest. Space was beautiful, but it was also brutally indifferent. Mars, as the crew had learned time and time again, was a force that couldn't be controlled. And no matter how many milestones were reached, there was always another obstacle, another challenge waiting just beyond the horizon. It wasn't just the technical challenges that weighed heavily on the astronauts, it was the emotional burden of being so far from Earth. Samantha Lawson, who had once been confident and strong, was now starting to show cracks in her exterior. The isolation of Mars, the weight of leadership, and the unrelenting pressure to succeed were beginning to take their toll. "I can't do this anymore," Samantha had whispered into her helmet one evening. Her voice, though muffled by the comms system, still carried a heavy desperation. "I can't keep pretending everything's okay when I'm barely holding on." Musk had heard the transmission. His chest tightened. He wasn't surprised, he'd expected it, really. Space was a pressure cooker, and eventually, everyone cracked. It was only a matter of time before the reality of what they were doing hit home. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he allowed a few minutes to pass, giving both Samantha and himself a moment to breathe. The silence between them was palpable, filled with the weight of unspoken words. Back on Earth, Musk's own team was facing growing frustrations. He had been tirelessly pushing them to deliver on every facet of the Mars mission, technology, logistics, research, but the cracks were starting to show there too. People were exhausted, stressed, and the overwhelming demands were beginning to take a toll. "We're reaching our limits, Elon," Gwynne Shotwell said one afternoon, her tone unusually blunt. "We've hit a critical juncture. The mission's success is at risk if we don't get more funding. You can't keep going at this pace without some external support. People are burning out." Musk leaned forward in his chair, staring at the report in front of him. The numbers didn't lie. Despite their best efforts, they were running out of time. The more ambitious the mission became, the more resources it drained. There was no way to sustain this kind of effort without a major infusion of capital. "I know," Musk said quietly, rubbing his eyes. "But we've come so far. I can't back down now." "Backing down isn't an option, Elon." "But we can't keep pushing people past their breaking point," Gwynne countered. "This is bigger than any one person. You need to think about the team." Musk's mind whirred. She was right, but the pressure was suffocating. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that every decision he made, every action he took, could lead to disaster. The success of SpaceX, of Mars, had become so intertwined with his own sense of purpose that he struggled to separate the two. "I'll handle it," Musk finally said, trying to mask the doubt in his voice. Meanwhile, the crew on Mars had gathered to discuss the next stage of the mission. Despite the greenhouse breakthrough, there was no time to rest. The next step, creating a stable water supply, was even more critical. Without water, all their efforts would be for nothing. The problem was, Mars didn't offer up its resources easily. Water, while theoretically available in the form of ice, was buried deep beneath the planet's surface. Extracting it would be a monumental task. "Are we sure this is the right move?" Samantha asked, her voice betraying her concern. "We've already made progress, but this is going to take everything we have. What if it doesn't work?" "We've come too far to stop now," came the reply from one of the engineers. "We'll make it work, just like we did with the greenhouse." The crew had no choice. They couldn't afford to fail. But deep down, they all knew that this next task would be their biggest challenge yet. The weight of the mission, of their roles as pioneers, pressed down on them harder than ever. As the days passed, Musk continued to grapple with the internal struggle that had plagued him since the beginning. His relentless drive for perfection, for success, had led him to make decisions that he knew were starting to stretch the team beyond their limits. But he couldn't stop. To stop now would mean to abandon the dream he had spent decades building. Mars wasn't just a mission, it was his legacy. The future of humanity depended on it. But as he watched the numbers tick by on the monitor, a thought kept gnawing at the back of his mind. How much was too much? How many people, how many lives, were worth sacrificing to achieve this dream? It was an uncomfortable question, one that he had been trying to avoid for weeks. But it was becoming impossible to ignore. Back on Mars, the next few days passed in a blur of activity. The team had begun the process of drilling into the surface to extract the water they so desperately needed. The pressure was mounting with each passing moment. Samantha stood at the drill site, staring out at the horizon. The vast emptiness of Mars stretched out before her, unfeeling, indifferent to the human struggle unfolding within its barren confines. She could feel the weight of it all, her crew, her responsibility, and the constant reminder that failure meant more than just disappointment. Failure meant death. Her fingers tightened around the tool she was holding, her knuckles white. The drill was making progress, but it was slow, painstakingly so. Time, as always, was running out. Then, there was a sharp sound, a grinding, crunching noise that sent a ripple of alarm through the crew. The drill had hit something hard. Something unexpected. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, as if Mars itself was warning them to stop. Samantha's heart raced as she watched the readouts on the console, trying to make sense of the data. "I don't like this," one of the engineers said, his voice tense. "We need to pull back. This could be dangerous." But Samantha wasn't about to give up now. They had come too far. They couldn't afford to fail. She keyed in a command to continue. "This is for all of us," she said, her voice hard. "We keep going." As the drilling continued, a sense of dread settled over the crew. Mars was pushing back. But there was no turning back now. The task had been set, and they would see it through, no matter the cost. Back on Earth, Musk was once again facing pressure from every side. The media, the investors, the public, all were demanding answers. Progress was slow, but progress was still progress. He couldn't afford to let the mission fall behind schedule. He couldn't afford to show weakness. But as he stared at the feeds from Mars, watching the team drill into the Martian surface, a cold realization hit him. The price of progress was higher than he had ever imagined. The crew on Mars had reached the point of no return. They had committed to the mission with everything they had, and now, as they drilled into the Martian soil, it felt as though the planet itself was resisting them. The vibrations from the drill echoed through the ground, and the momentary tremors sent waves of anxiety through the team. Samantha stood in front of the drill console, her face grim. Despite the calculations, despite the technology they had at their disposal, the task of extracting water from Mars had proven more difficult than anyone had predicted. The readings on the screen told the story: a mineral deposit, much harder than anticipated, had interfered with their drilling efforts. This was a setback they hadn't accounted for, and it was just one more obstacle in a long list of challenges. "We need to stop," one of the engineers, Ryan, suggested, his voice tight with apprehension. "We've gone too far. We don't know what we're dealing with down there. If we keep pushing, we could cause a catastrophic failure." Samantha's eyes narrowed. She didn't want to stop. Failure wasn't an option. "We keep going," she said firmly. "We can't back out now. This is our one shot." There was a collective silence as the team exchanged uneasy glances. They were all feeling it, the weight of the decision that had to be made. But Samantha's voice carried authority, and so they continued. Back in the SpaceX command center, Musk had his eyes glued to the feed from Mars, his pulse quickening with every passing second. The tension in the control room was palpable. They had come so far, and yet, it felt as if they were on the precipice of disaster. "Is there any update from Mars?" Musk asked, his voice low. Gwyn Shotwell looked up from her terminal, her expression unreadable. "They're pushing ahead with the drilling, but the situation is becoming unstable. We might need to intervene, but the decision's up to them." Musk ran a hand through his hair. "I know. But I can't make that call from here. They have to make it themselves. We've invested too much to back out now. And they won't quit. Samantha won't quit." The mission was no longer just a scientific venture. It was personal. It had always been personal for Musk, but now the emotional and psychological toll was becoming evident. The higher the stakes became, the more it felt like he was walking a thin line between vision and recklessness. Back on Mars, Samantha's face was etched with determination. She had been the one to stand at the forefront, the one who had walked out onto the Martian surface first. She wasn't going to be the one who failed the mission, not after all they had sacrificed. The team continued working tirelessly, trying to break through the mineral layer that was stubbornly resisting their efforts. But the cracks were showing. The crew was beginning to feel the strain of the months-long mission. The isolation was taking its toll. As the drill finally broke through, a loud metallic screech filled the air, then silence. The crew held their breath. "It's done," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're through. But I don't know what we've unleashed." The sound of the drill's completion was almost anticlimactic compared to the dread that filled the room. They had done it. They had successfully extracted water from Mars. But at what cost? Samantha nodded slowly, her face drained of emotion. "Let's collect the data," she said, as if trying to regain control. But even she knew that there was no going back now. Back on Earth, Musk's thoughts were a swirl of anxiety, excitement, and the weight of responsibility. They had made it this far, but every success seemed to come with a new complication. The breakthroughs were groundbreaking, yes, but at what price? What would happen if they didn't pull the mission back in time? He stared at the data coming in from Mars, but his mind kept drifting back to the conversation he'd had with Gwyn earlier. He knew the cost of progress, and it wasn't just measured in dollars, it was measured in people, in time, in lives. "We've got to secure additional funding," Gwyn said, her voice shaking slightly as she addressed the room. "The team on Mars is stretched thin, and the emotional toll is starting to show. We need to act fast before this mission unravels." Musk ran a hand through his hair, his gaze still fixed on the screen. He knew it was true. The pressure on the astronauts, the strain on the team, he could feel it. But asking for more help, more money, felt like admitting that he couldn't handle it alone. But deep down, he knew that he couldn't continue pushing the team at this pace without consequences. The question was, how far could he go before it all came crashing down? Samantha stood in front of the small storage area they had designated for the water sample. Her heart was still pounding from the drill's final push, and the weight of the moment was beginning to sink in. The mission's success wasn't just about collecting water, it was about making history. They had opened a door that no one had thought possible. And yet, the emotional cost was becoming clearer by the day. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," Samantha confessed, her voice shaking as she spoke into the comm system. She had been avoiding talking about it, had been trying to keep her emotions in check, but it was becoming impossible to ignore. Musk's voice came through, steady but sympathetic. "I know it's tough, Samantha. You're doing something that's never been done before, and that's always going to be harder than we can imagine. But I believe in you, and I believe in this team. You're not alone. We're all in this together." Samantha tried to hold back her tears. She had to. But the emotions of the past months, of the isolation, the pressure, the constant fear of failure, had finally caught up to her. The responsibility she carried was enormous, and sometimes it felt like too much. "I just want to go home," she whispered. "But I can't let them down." There was a long silence before Musk's voice returned, softer this time. "You won't let anyone down. Just remember why you're here. It's not just about the mission. It's about what comes after." Musk spent the rest of the day in the command center, staring at the data from Mars, replaying the conversations in his mind. He couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The toll the mission was taking on his team was real. The pressure was too much for any of them to bear alone. He finally made a decision. He called an emergency meeting with SpaceX's board of directors. "We need to secure additional funding," Musk said, his voice firm. "Not just to keep the mission going, but to ensure the safety of the people involved. We can't afford to let the pressure break us." There was a moment of silence before one of the directors spoke. "Are you sure, Elon? I mean, this is Mars we're talking about. The world is watching, and this mission is more important than ever." "You're asking for a lot." "I don't care about the world watching," Musk snapped. "I care about the people who are out there, who are giving everything they have for this. We need to put their well-being first, or everything we're doing will be meaningless." Back on Mars, Samantha received a message from Earth. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as they thought. The mission was far from over. The risks were still high. But they had broken through. And now, they had to keep pushing, no matter the cost. Mars had tested them in ways no one could have predicted. The breakthroughs and victories felt sweet, but each triumph was followed by an even deeper challenge. As the team on Mars continued to extract the water, the weight of their mission bore down on them harder than ever before. Samantha stood on the Martian surface once again, gazing out at the dusty horizon. The red planet stretched before her, vast and unforgiving. Yet there was something in that landscape, a beauty, a quiet majesty, that kept her going, kept all of them going. But as much as the mission had pushed them to the brink, there was a bigger question looming over their success: could they continue? And at what cost? On Earth, the pressure on Musk had never been greater. As the mission on Mars grew more successful, the demands from investors and the media increased exponentially. The world watched as SpaceX made history, but they also demanded results: faster, bigger, more. And all of it came at a price. Musk was holed up in his office, buried under a mountain of reports. Each one had a familiar theme: money, time, resources. The mission's success was an undeniable triumph, but it had taken everything they had, and now the team on Mars was pushing closer to their limits. There was no way they could sustain this with the current funding. "Elon, we need to make a call," Gwynne Shotwell's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and to the point as always. "The crew is at the breaking point. The emotional toll is worse than we anticipated. We can't keep this up without more help." Musk rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He already knew. Every conversation with the crew, every message from Mars, told him the same thing. They had made history, but at what price? "I know," he muttered, not even looking up. "But what other choice do we have? If we stop now, we'll never be able to go back. Not to Mars, not to humanity's future. You can't run this mission alone, Elon. You've got to think about the people, not just the goal," Gwynne said gently, but firmly. "You know that." Musk paused, the words resonating in his mind. People. He had always been focused on the future of humanity, the colonization of Mars, the ambitious dream. But he had to admit, he had neglected the cost of pushing those people too far. He knew that he needed to secure more funding, not just for the mission, but for the crew's well-being. Without it, the dream would collapse. On Mars, the emotional strain was beginning to show in the small, almost unnoticed ways. The team's morale had always been high, but with every passing day, the isolation was starting to chip away at them. Long shifts, constant pressure, the overwhelming uncertainty about their future, they were all starting to take their toll. Samantha noticed it first in Ryan. The usually upbeat engineer was no longer making jokes during the long shifts. His eyes had grown dull, and the constant exhaustion was beginning to wear him down. He had always been one of the most reliable members of the team, but now, he looked lost. "Hey, you alright?" Samantha asked one evening when she found him sitting alone, staring at the data screens. Ryan didn't look up immediately. He took a deep breath, the kind that suggested he was holding something back. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "I don't know, Sam," he said, his voice strained. "We've done everything right. We've made history. But it doesn't feel like we're winning. It feels like we're just hanging on." Samantha understood. The emotional toll of this mission wasn't something they'd been prepared for. They had trained for years, studied the technical aspects of the mission, but no one had prepared them for the weight of isolation, of never knowing when the next communication with Earth might come, of knowing that you might be the last person to ever set foot on a world. Ryan was struggling with the same question that had been haunting all of them: was it worth it? Back on Earth, Musk knew that the mission had gone beyond the point of no return. But he also knew he couldn't afford to let his team break under the pressure. He couldn't afford to lose the dream, not now. Mars was a symbol of humanity's future, and every dollar he spent, every ounce of energy he poured into SpaceX, felt justified by that belief. Still, the deeper question persisted: what was the price of that future? The question haunted him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He'd always believed that pushing forward, no matter the cost, was the key to reaching the stars. But now, as he stood in front of a massive data screen in the SpaceX command center, he wondered if the cost was too high. The emails from his team were filled with subtle hints of exhaustion and frustration, and the reports from Mars showed that the crew was not just facing technical challenges, but psychological ones too. "I don't think they can keep doing this, Elon," Gwyn said again, her voice heavy. "We need a solution, fast. You can't expect them to keep going without help." He knew she was right. Musk ran his fingers through his hair, trying to think of a way out, but the solution seemed so distant. What could he do? What more could they ask from his team? "Do what you need to do," Musk finally said, his voice taut with emotion. "Get the help we need. Just, don't let them give up. We can't let them down." As the days wore on, the emotional tension on Mars began to escalate. The crew was nearing their breaking point, but the weight of the mission pressed them forward. They had made it through so much, why stop now? Samantha, exhausted both physically and mentally, sat down at the communications station one evening and tried to reach Earth. She wasn't sure what she expected. Words of encouragement, maybe. A bit of reassurance that everything would be okay. When the connection finally came through, it was Gwyn who greeted her. The familiar voice of Earth felt almost like a lifeline. "How's it going, Sam?" Gwyn asked, her voice calm but with an underlying sense of concern. "It's getting harder," Samantha replied, her voice cracking. "We've made progress, but I don't know how much longer we can keep going like this. The strain is starting to show." "I know. Elon's working on getting more support. We're doing everything we can to keep you going, but you all have to hang on. Just a little longer." Samantha nodded, even though she knew Gwyn couldn't see her. They had come so far, but she wasn't sure how much more they could endure. But she also knew that this mission was bigger than her, bigger than any one person. It was humanity's future at stake. And as hard as it was to admit, there was no turning back now. On Earth, Musk wrestled with his own demons. The mission was a beacon of hope for the future of humanity, but at the same time, it was threatening to tear everything apart. The strain on the crew was obvious. The cost, both human and financial, was skyrocketing. And the pressure to deliver was relentless. Musk knew he couldn't keep going down this road without consequence. He had pushed the boundaries of space exploration further than anyone thought possible, but now the balance between success and failure was dangerously thin. The decision was clear: he had to do whatever it took to get the crew the support they needed, both in terms of resources and emotional health. If that meant asking for more funding, more time, more patience, he had to do it. And yet, in the pit of his stomach, there was an undeniable fear. The mission had already cost so much, and the future of humanity was still in their hands. But could they afford to keep pushing forward without losing everything? The days on Mars were beginning to blend into one another. The monotony of life in the red dust had become suffocating. The isolation, the uncertainty, the constant pressure, it was all starting to push the team toward the breaking point. Yet, in spite of everything, they kept going. They had come this far, and to stop now was unthinkable. Samantha sat in a tiny command center, staring at the endless series of data feeds coming from the water extraction process. Their efforts had made significant progress, but the emotional strain was becoming impossible to ignore. The crew had endured so much, and yet the challenges seemed endless. They had succeeded in extracting a limited amount of water from the Martian soil, a breakthrough that could change the course of humanity's history. But with each victory, new obstacles emerged: technical issues, power shortages, psychological fatigue. The longer they stayed on Mars, the harder it became to maintain their focus. As Samantha sat, deep in thought, Ryan entered the room. His face was pale, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but there was a new sense of determination in his step. "Samantha, we need to talk," Ryan said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a quiet desperation. Samantha looked up from the screens and gestured for him to take a seat. "What's going on?" "We're reaching the limits of what we can do," Ryan began, his voice a mixture of frustration and concern. "The systems are starting to fail, one after another. The drill's almost fried, and we've been running on backup power for days now. If something doesn't change soon, we're going to lose everything we've worked for." Samantha let out a deep sigh, her shoulders heavy with the weight of his words. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. "I know," she said softly. "But what's the alternative? We can't stop now, Ryan. If we do, everything we've worked for, everything that's at stake, it'll be for nothing." Ryan shook his head, pacing back and forth. "I get it, Sam. I do. But what's the point of pushing if we're just going to burn out? We can't keep going like this. We're running on fumes." Samantha remained silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew he was right. The mission had become a fragile thing, held together by the barest of threads. But there was something in her, something deep inside, that refused to give up. "We can't give up," she finally said, her voice more forceful now. "Not now. Not after everything we've done. We've come too far to let it slip away." Ryan stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes softening. "I'm not saying we give up, Sam. But we need help. We can't do this on our own anymore." Samantha's eyes flickered with understanding. She knew the team had to make a choice: they had to either push forward, no matter the cost, or they had to ask for help. And asking for help wasn't easy. It felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that they were human, vulnerable, not invincible. But at the end of the day, what mattered more than their pride was the mission. The future they were working to create. "I'll reach out to Earth," Samantha said, standing up from her chair. "We need more resources, more support, or we won't make it. The team needs backup, and it needs it now." Back on Earth, Musk had been waiting for a signal from Mars. The hours had stretched into days, each one more uncertain than the last. The team on Mars was facing challenges beyond anything they had predicted. Musk knew it was only a matter of time before they reached their breaking point. When the communication finally came through, Musk was already bracing himself for the worst. Samantha's face appeared on the screen, her expression serious, almost tired. "Elon," she began, her voice steady but laced with an undeniable exhaustion. "We've made progress. We've managed to extract water from the Martian soil, but we're running into more problems with the systems. The crew is stretched too thin, and if we don't get more resources soon, we're going to lose everything. Musk's heart tightened as he listened. He had feared this moment, but hearing it firsthand made it all the more real. The mission was teetering on the edge. I understand, Musk said, his voice calm, though inside, his mind was racing. What do you need from us? We need more power, more supplies, and we need it fast, Samantha replied. We can't keep going at this pace, Elon. We've pushed ourselves as far as we can. If we're going to succeed, we need backup. It's not just about the mission anymore. It's about keeping the team alive. Musk felt the weight of her words. He had always been the one to push for progress, to drive the team forward, but this was different. It wasn't about reaching Mars anymore, it was about keeping his people safe. I'll get it sorted, Sam, Musk said, his voice firm. You have my word. You're not alone. I'll make sure the resources are there. Just hang on. Samantha nodded, though her face still reflected the burden of the decision they had all made. Thank you, Elon. We're counting on you. After the communication ended, Musk sat in his office, staring at the data feed from Mars. He knew this was the turning point, the moment that would determine the success or failure of the mission. He had always believed that the future of humanity lay in the stars, but he hadn't fully understood the cost until now. In his mind, he could see the faces of the astronauts, their sacrifices, their exhaustion. The stakes had always been high, but now, it was clear that the cost was much greater than anyone had anticipated. Samantha and her team had given everything. And now, he had to do the same. But the question lingered in his mind, would it be enough? For the crew on Mars, the moment of truth had arrived. They had made it this far, and now, they had to trust that the help they desperately needed would arrive. The next few days were filled with a tense anticipation as they continued to work, preparing for the next phase of their mission, knowing that any small mistake could undo everything. And then, finally, a message came through from Earth. We've got the resources, Musk's voice came through, calm and resolute. We're sending everything you need. Help is on the way. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. They could finish what they had started. The team on Mars had been on edge for weeks, but now, a new energy surged through them. The message from Elon Musk had given them a glimmer of hope. The resources they so desperately needed were on their way. It was a lifeline, one that would keep their mission alive, but it also carried with it the heavy burden of knowing that this was their last chance. The next few days would be crucial. Samantha stood at the communications station, watching the flickering data as they began preparations for the final phase of the mission. The crew had been operating on minimal resources for far too long, and now, they had a short window to complete the extraction and secure their place in history. There could be no mistakes. Ryan entered the room, his face still drawn from the previous weeks of grueling work, but there was a spark in his eyes now. The energy on Mars had shifted. The team had renewed resolve, and with it, a sense of unity that had been sorely tested. We've got the new supplies coming in, Ryan said, nodding toward the screen where Elon Musk's face appeared, his voice crackling through the comms system. Your mission is not just about science anymore, Musk said, his voice firm but laced with an undeniable sense of pride. It's about proving what humanity is capable of. You've made it this far. Now, it's time to finish what we started. The weight of his words hit Samantha like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about them, it was about humanity's future. The mission had become a symbol, an emblem of what they could accomplish together, but it was also a test of everything they had. We won't let you down, she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Musk's face softened, though his eyes still reflected the gravity of the moment. I know you won't. We're all counting on you. As the new supplies began to arrive, the team prepared for the final push. They had enough water extraction equipment, enough fuel, and enough power to sustain them through the next phase of the operation. But even as they worked, the anxiety continued to weigh heavily on them. The mission wasn't over yet. They had come so far, and the finish line was finally in sight, but they knew all too well that things could still go wrong at the last minute. The days blurred together as the team worked tirelessly, managing the systems, maintaining their equipment, and ensuring that every detail was accounted for. As the sun set on Mars, an eerie red glow casting long shadows across the barren landscape, Samantha stood outside the base and looked up at the sky. The sight of Earth, distant and pale, was a constant reminder of how far they had come, and how much was at stake. "Think we'll make it?" Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts. Samantha turned to see him standing beside her, his face tired but determined. "We have to," she said quietly, gazing back at the horizon. "This is it. This is the moment that will change everything. There's no going back now." The hours leading into the final phase of the mission were the most intense they had faced. Systems were calibrated, data analyzed, and the team had set up the final steps to extract the remaining water reserves. It was a process that required perfect synchronization. There couldn't be any room for error. Samantha's heart raced as the crew worked in unison, moving with precision as they prepared for the water extraction. Ryan was at the controls, carefully monitoring the system's outputs. The tension in the room was palpable. Even the slightest malfunction could jeopardize everything. Suddenly, the comms system crackled to life, and Elon Musk's voice rang through the base. "Status update, Samantha. How's it going?" Samantha took a deep breath before responding, trying to keep her voice calm despite the anxiety that gnawed at her. "Everything's going according to plan, Elon," she said, though the uncertainty was clear in her tone. "We're about to start the final phase of extraction." Musk's voice was steady but filled with anticipation. "You've got this. We're all behind you." The team exchanged nervous glances. It was now or never. As the final sequence of the extraction began, something unexpected happened. The machinery, which had been running on the brink for days, suddenly surged to life. The ground vibrated beneath their feet, and the hum of the machines filled the room with an almost eerie intensity. Samantha's eyes widened as the data feed began to show results that were beyond their expectations. The water extraction was working, and at an unprecedented rate. "We've got it!" Ryan exclaimed, his voice a mix of disbelief and joy. "It's working!" The team gathered around, watching in awe as the numbers climbed higher and higher. The breakthrough they had all hoped for was finally happening. The Martian soil was yielding more than they could have ever imagined. For the first time in weeks, the crew allowed themselves to feel something other than exhaustion. The weight of their sacrifices began to lift, and the tension that had plagued them for so long started to ease. But Samantha knew that this wasn't the end. It was a turning point, yes, but there was still much work to be done. The final push had just begun, and they had to see it through to the very end. With the water extraction process finally working smoothly, the crew worked non-stop to collect as much as they could before their resources ran out. Each successful phase of the operation brought them closer to completing the mission, but the emotional toll was far from over. As the team finished the last critical phase, Samantha found herself standing alone in the observatory, staring out at the Martian landscape. The desolate terrain seemed endless, stretching out into the void. She couldn't help but think about everything they had been through, the hardships, the sacrifices, the uncertainty. Ryan joined her, his eyes tired but filled with a quiet satisfaction. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Samantha nodded, feeling a wave of emotion swell up in her chest. "We did. But it was never just about this, was it? It was always about what we could prove. About what humanity could do." Ryan didn't say anything at first. Then he glanced at her, his expression serious. "And what do you think we've proved?" Samantha thought about it for a moment. "That even in the darkest times, when everything seems impossible, we can still find a way. We've proven that. We've shown that the future of humanity isn't just about reaching the stars, it's about what we're willing to sacrifice to get there. Ryan didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. They both understood what the mission had cost them, and what it had given them in return. The future, their future, was now within reach. As the mission neared its completion, the crew began the final phase of preparing for departure. The supplies had been extracted, the systems were fully operational, and the dream of a new era of space exploration was finally within their grasp. But as they packed up and prepared for the long journey home, one question remained. It was a question that had been there from the very beginning. Was it worth it? For Samantha and the rest of the crew, the answer was clear. They had given everything, pushed the limits of human endurance, faced the impossible, and emerged victorious. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with more challenges, the journey they had undertaken would forever be etched into history. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?